So if you clicked on the video, you already know what this is. It's actually a 100 card. It's a 100 commander tier list from the last really year, but more than a year. It's actually probably the past 2 years of commander decks. I'm going to give you my unfiltered opinions. And ideally, I'm going to keep it to under a minute for each one. If there's not a lot that I have to talk about, we're just going to gloss over it and just say it ends up in this category. You might be asking yourself, Kyle, what is my grading scheme here? Well, we have A through F on my board over here, and it's whatever the hell I want it to be. So how about that? If it's something that I really vibe with, it's going to get that tier up there in A. And you might ask, Kyle, why is there no S on this board? Well, it's because I forgot, okay? I put the A on there, and then I realized that, oh shit, I should have probably had an S on here. And you know what? I don't regret it one bit. So let's just get on to the rest of the video, leave some hate comments down below, and also tell me how much you want to see me in a cutoff next time. All right, we are going to start off with an oldie but a goodie. That's Babala Saga. So Babala Saga the Night Witch is a 3 mana, so 1 Golgari colors for a human warlock. Definitely doesn't look like a human. Tap and sacrifice up to 3 permanents. If there were 3 or more card types among them, each opponent loses 3, I gain 3, and then you draw 3 cards. So this card, I originally built it because, or this commander I originally built because of Joey from the EDH Recast. He was the major influence for me to actually give this commander a try. And initially it was a little bit confusing just because the up to 3 actually could be an artifact, creature, and enchantment all in one if you're able to do that. You know, maybe you have like an Eidolon of Blossoms, which is an enchantment creature, and then you have a Liquimetal Torque, which gives it the attribute of artifact. You can sacrifice that one thing, and Babala Saga says, oh yes, you've met my criteria for 3, therefore I'm going to drain the table for 3, and on top of that, draw 3 cards. I took this deck apart. I took it apart because the turns took forever, because I had a lot of untap effects, and eventually I could get over the finish line, but not reliably get over the finish line, if that makes sense. So Babala Saga, I think that this is going to end up in a solid C tier because it's a good deck. It was fun. It taught me a lot about Commander because I built it at an earlier stage, but the turns take too long for me, and I'm probably never going to build it again because of that unless I do like a Commander sealed event or something, but even then I doubt that it's going to make the cut. Oh my God, this is going to take forever. So up next is Brutaclad Telcor Engineer. That is a 6 mana. Is it commander? Creature tokens you control have haste. That's pretty hot. So am I. At the beginning of combat on your turn, make a 2/1 blue Phyrexian Mirror artifact creature token. That's a mouthful. Say that 10 times fast. Then you may choose another token that you control, or just a token. If you do, each other token you control becomes a copy of that token. So Brutaclad, I actually initially built because Josh Lee Kwai talked about it a lot, and he felt that Brutaclad was a strong commander. Turns out Brutaclad is a strong commander, but it's really difficult to play because you end up in situations where you need a lot of setup in order to make it work. For me, I actually was using the Saga, or is it the Saga? Yeah, it's a Saga. There and Back Again, which is the 5 mana one where you make Smog, which is a 6/6 dragon token. And then when it dies, you make 13 treasure. So my goal was to basically get Smog out. So I had tutors in the deck to get that enchantment, play it before our commander. And then the turn before the Saga was going to go off, you either play Brutaclad, or the turn that you get Smog, you play Brutaclad. But it immediately falls apart if somebody like Swords to Plowshares is your Smog, like in your upkeep, or they get rid of Brutaclad before combat or whatever. This is really like one of those monolith commanders that seems really good on paper, and then when you get into actually playing it, it gets a little sticky. It gets hard to actually keep around, and it's just not that consistent. And I think that's really the biggest part. It's not consistent, whereas Babala Saga over there can give you some very consistent routine games. Brutaclad, I don't believe, really can. And for that reason, Brutaclad is going to be relegated to the D tier for me. And yeah, by the way, these are actual cards. I have no respect. Actually, no, that's not true. I just didn't want to waste extra ink on my printer, and a lot of these I'm never going to use again. So if a little bit of the backing tears off or whatever, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, everybody. You know what? I will, if that happens, I'll give whatever ones away that have the backing torn off of them by the end of this, but we got to keep going. Otherwise, we'll be here all day. So Saruman of Many Colors is up next. So this is an Esper commander. So Esper meaning white, blue, black, and it is 6 mana in total. It is an avatar wizard for 5/4 with ward. Everything has ward on it. Thanks, Gavin Verhey. Discard an enchantment, instant, or sorcery. Super good. This ward cost in most cases just meant that Saruman gets to stick around unless there's a board wipe, which turns out is pretty good when you have a monolith commander like this. It also has whenever you cast your second spell each turn, each opponent mills 2. When one or more cards are milled this way, exile target enchantment, instant, or sorcery with equal or lesser mana value from that spell from an opponent's graveyard. Okay, you copy the exiled card, you can cast it without paying its mana cost. Listen, it's confusing. So you cast your second spell. Think about whatever mana value of that spell is. So if it's like a 3 CMC spell, basically Saruman says, all right, everybody, mill some cards, all your opponents, that is. And then when all of your opponents mill, you then get to select another instant, sorcery, or enchantment from among them and then cast it if the mana cost is equal to or lesser than the mana cost of the spell you cast. Don't give this to a new player. This deck is really confusing. I will say this card actually caused so many confusing moments in games for me, and I just don't think it's user-friendly for that purpose. It's also difficult because you're building around the second card you cast each turn, meaning you have a lot of cantrippy effects in the deck, but unfortunately sometimes you get locked into your cantrips being in your hand, meaning it's not as consistent unless you want to put a bunch of tutors in the deck, but that's not my style. It really, I think, actually falls below Brutaclad in my list. Definitely not F tier, but it's going to wind up in E. E for exceptionally not good. Yeah, that felt right. And up next we have Galea, Kindler of Hope. Galea is an interesting one. So I have a love-hate relationship with her. 4 mana commander. It's 1+ Bant colors. It's an elf knight. Elf is potentially, something that matters, but in our case, it doesn't really matter. It's a 4/4 with vigilance, which is also great. Vigilance is an excellent ability to have on this. You can look at the top card of your library anytime. You have me hooked. You may cast aura and equipment from the top. When you cast an equipment this way, it gains when ETBs attach it to target creature you control. So here's the thing. I just put out a video regarding how your deck should sort of work without your commander. This deck really sort of suffers a lot from this ability because you need the commander out in order to look at the top and cast off the top. And if your commander's already out when you cast, let's say, I don't know, a Sword of Fire and Ice or a Sword of Feast and Famine, something like that, who are you going to equip it to? Probably your commander. And oftentimes it is almost always the best choice because it's better just to commander damage somebody out early, get a problem player off the table, and then you can sort of deal with the leftovers. That sounds terrible, but you could deal with the leftovers, which are the other players at the table. And I found that this play experience isn't really for me. I built the deck a long time ago. Voltron in general is not something that I've really vibed with or connected with in any big way, so I ended up taking apart the Galea deck. I think it's one of those user-friendly decks where if you are new to Voltron and you want a good play experience, I think Galea is going to give it to you because Galea just makes your deck so much more consistent. She comes out early, you can cast off the top, and if you run all of the things like Pure Steel Paladin, the Shadow Spears, the swords, etc., I think you're going to have a good time with her. Honestly, she definitely doesn't make it to B or A tier. Subtle flex there. But she's going to go into C tier with Babala Saga. I probably won't build her again, but she was actually quite good and consistent, if that makes sense. All right, we have a couple 5-color commanders coming up next. So first is Omnath, Locus of All. So this is an interesting one. When it got printed, there was just an absolute ton of hype because we finally completed, the Omnath cycle. We went from 4-color Omnath, which basically dominated formats, into this one. And I think that with the 4-color Omnath being so powerful, Wizards sort of had to dial it back a little bit when they printed the next Omnath. And unfortunately, we got lackluster results with this one. It's 5 mana, so it's Wooburg. And then the black pip can be Phyrexian, so you can pay 4 mana, basically, plus 2 life to cast it on turn 4 or 3, whatever. And then the effect is pretty sexy. It's if you would lose unspent mana, so it's a replacement effect if you would lose, that mana becomes black instead. And then at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase, look at the top of your library. You may reveal that card if it has 3 or more colored mana symbols, so the mana pips, in its mana cost. If you do, add 3 mana in any combination of its colors, put it into your hand. If you don't reveal it, put it into your hand. So Essentially, it's an extra draw every turn. If it's something with 3 colored pips in the mana cost, you basically get to draw and then generate 3 mana in any combination of colors, effectively making it easier to cast on that turn. Now, my biggest mistake that I made with my deck is that I thought that this meant I needed to run like the different charm effects, like the ones that have 3 different colored pips. That is not the case. You can run 3 blue, 3 green, 3 black, whatever you want. And I think if I did this deck again, that's sort of how I would structure my build. But unfortunately, I just got a bad, sort of bad experience, a bad taste in my mouth. I didn't really win a lot. The mana was clunky. I didn't really put in all the necessary fetch lands, which we're going to get into that in a little bit with another one of my commanders. And so ultimately I ended up axing this deck, and it's probably not going to make its way back, to be honest. But let me know if you had a good experience with this commander and if you did something a little bit different. For me, unfortunately, it's going to wind up in E tier. It's definitely not an F, but it's going to wind up in E tier with Saruman. Niv-Mizzet Supreme. This is a dragon avatar. It's a 5/5 flying, hex-proof from mono-colored. Each instant and sorcery in your graveyard that's exactly 2 colors has Jumpstart. Jumpstart means you can cast it from your graveyard with an additional cost to discard a card to the graveyard. This card is great. I actually really enjoyed my deck with Niv-Mizzet Supreme. I don't remember if I actually put up a list online for people to view. I just sort of built it on a whim because Niv-Mizzet is one of my favorite characters, and so it was the card that got me into the game. Not this one, but the older Perun version. So I thought I was going to give it a try, see how it went. And to be honest with you, I failed a lot with this deck. I didn't really have any good experiences with it. I've had a love-hate relationship with Wooburg commanders, and in this circumstance, I don't know if I can really recommend this commander for... How should I say this? It's a divisive commander because I don't think it's powerful enough to keep up with strong tables unless you're running a lot of the more degenerate fast mana type of stuff, all of the fetch lands in the deck, that type of thing to actually reliably get this commander out, because it needs to be exactly 2 colors in order to use this ability. You need Wooburg in order to cast your commander. It's just a very mana pip hungry deck, and it requires a lot of fixing. It's a lot of fetching. It's just kind of annoying to go through the process, to be honest with you. So this is another one that I'm not going to sort of have back, but it was effective enough that I think it's going to make it into D tier with Brutaclad, actually. So let's put Niv-Mizzet Supreme there. By the way, you like the board that I made, guys? It's pretty cool, right? Up next is Sephris of the Hidden Ways. I finally took apart my Sephris deck after a long time. This commander was excellent. I loved this. It really got me more, intrigued about the dungeon mechanic when it came out. And this is an Esper commander, so white, blue, black, that's it, for a 2/3 wizard, human wizard. Whenever one or more creature cards, that's important, are put into your graveyard from anywhere, venture into the dungeon. This triggers once per turn. And then whenever you complete a dungeon, you basically get to reanimate something, bring something from your graveyard back onto the battlefield. And that's a really broken, disgusting ability, especially with some of the shorter dungeons. I think Lost Mines of Phandelver is one of them. And in this case, the creature cards is something that really messed me up for a long time, because there's a dungeon where you can make a 4/1 skeleton with Menace. You can also make goblin tokens in some of the dungeons. And when I first played this commander, it was a long time ago, probably around the time it first came out. And I was under the assumption that it triggered off of anything, including tokens going to the graveyard. That is not the case. It has to be an actual physical magic card that is not a token that goes to the graveyard in order to trigger this. Now, don't get me wrong. It's still really good. You just have to keep that in mind. It would make it disgustingly busted. And I had a lot of games where I was like, man, this commander feels really unfair. Turns out it is really unfair because I was misplaying it. Don't misplay it. But this commander is extremely strong. You should go and check out my Sephris video if you're interested to learn more about her. She's going to wind up in B tier. Now, I am saving A tier for a lot of praise, so we'll wait for that in a few minutes. But Sephris winds up as our first commander in B. Osgir. Let's have a discussion about our boy. You know him. Some of you love him. Some of you hate him. He's 2 in Boros for a 4/4 giant artificer with Vigilance. I'm excited. Good stat line. Vigilance is great. Pay 1, sack an artifact. Target creature you control gets +2/+0 until end of turn. It's a sack outlet on a stick. It's in Boros colors. It's decently statted. I'm in it. Pay X and tap. Exile an artifact card with mana value X from your graveyard. That's all part of the cost. Make 2 tokens that are copies of the exiled card. Activate only as a sorcery. Why do I hate this commander? Well, I shouldn't say hate. I strongly dislike this commander. And why is that? It's because this is one of those commanders that reliably, it doesn't really get you there. Your turns end up turning into a lot of durdling. You don't have a clear way to get over the finish line and win the game. Sure, you can make a bunch of copies of Ugin's Nexus, for instance, and take 3 extra turns or whatever. But over those 3 extra turns, you're going to monopolize the entire table's time for 30 plus minutes as you durdle, draw a bunch of cards, play out your Worm Coil engines, etc., Triplicate Titans, all that good stuff, then pass to yourself, then try and use something like Pull from Eternity to get Ugin's Nexus back in your graveyard to then sack in order to get more extra turns, because you actually end up needing more like 4 to 5 extra turns in order to close out the game. It's maddening. I did not like this commander. The play style, I thought I was going to like it. I don't. I'm not going to put him in F because he doesn't deserve an F, but unfortunately he's going to be relegated to the E tier because I just couldn't really ever make this commander work how I wanted to. And you know what? A lot of people say the same thing. Unfortunately, Osgir seems like a commander that's going to be really great on the surface until you have your actual play experience with him, and it turns out not so good. Ariette of the Charmed Apple. Now, this is my best performing video of all time on my channel, hopefully to be superseded by this one. And it is a 3 mana, 1 in Orzhov, 2/4. Each creature that's enchanted by an aura that you control can't attack you or planeswalkers you control. At the beginning of your end step, each opponent loses X and you gain X, where X is the number of auras you control. This commander was freaking awesome when it came out. I was so stoked to build this, and I put out a video like right away. I did some play testing, but probably not enough for my actual video to be released. But I've heard from a lot of people from the comments, and weirdly, this is crazy to say, I've met people in real life, like at my local game store, that have been like, hey, you're the guy that made that Ariette of the Charmed Apple video, right? And I was like, yeah, that's me. And they tell me that the version of the deck that they play, which is very similar, plus or minus a few auras, because some new things have come out recently, really slaps. It's a really good deck list. I feel like for my group, it ended up being a bit too slow, but I think that it's still a good commander, and it utilizes auras in a very different and sort of unique way, which I appreciate. So I think for that reason, Ariette's going to go into C. It definitely doesn't make it into B, but it was a good commander. I have fond memories of playing it. And on top of that, it's one of my best performing videos. So I'm biased. Guess what? It's my list. It winds up in C. What about the Scorpion God, Kyle? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's a 5 mana commander. It is in, what's the color? Rakdos. So 3 black, red. Whenever a creature with a -1 counter on it dies, draw a card. And then you can pay 3, so 1 in Rakdos, put a -1 counter on target creature. When this card dies, return it to the owner's hand. It's the same god effect that like the Locust God, Scarab God have. You return it to your hand at the end step, which is great. Gets around commander tax, allows you to reliably play this out again because people are going to remove this commander. I still have this deck, but I'm considering sort of ripping it apart and using the land base in it to make other Rakdos decks because unfortunately, people only have to play against this commander a couple of times before they realize that it is just not okay to let it stick around. So it becomes an immediate target for removal. And, you know, you get a lot of fun games out of it. I ended up actually, because I enjoyed the deck so much initially upon making it, I actually bought the special Amonkhet Invocation version of the Scorpion God. Scorpion God, yes. And I don't regret it. I think that it's a fun commander. It utilizes -1 counters. There's very few cards that do that. You get to play a lot of -1 counter cards that other people, you know, they're not used to or they don't see it, etc. And I had a lot of fun with the deck. I think it's just one of those commanders, unfortunately, that has removal printed on this card itself because you can put negative counters on things, and people hate that. So, unfortunately, the Scorpion God, I think, is not quite a B tier, but it definitely makes it into the C tier with the other commanders. I'm going to talk about 2 commanders back to back here. I'm probably going to like cover myself up when they come on screen, but it's going to be Shorikai Genesis Engine and Urza Lord Protector. So the commander I actually built first was Urza Lord Protector because it's pretty sexy. Artifacts, instants, and sorceries that you cast cost 1 less. So just in your command zone inherently, you have a cost reducer that is only 3 mana to put out. And then you could pay 7 if you both own and control Urza Lord Protector. So, you know, you can't steal it from somebody. And an artifact named the Might Stone and the Weak Stone, exile them and then meld them into Urza Planeswalker. There's the the other version of the Urza Planeswalker. Everyone always laughed at me because my Mightstone and Weakstone was foil, but my commander was not foil. And this was strictly an artifact deck, but it was actually an artifact combo deck. It was essentially playing the reality chip, which once equipped to Urza allows you to play things off the top. Everyone knows where I'm going already. You have a cost reducer out like a Foundry Inspector, and then you play Sensei's Divining Top. And what does this do? It means that you can cast your Sensei's Divining Top off the top of your deck for 0. You can tap the top once it is in play, and then you can file it back to the top of your library. And then you just dig. You get a bunch of things out for free or cost reduced, which then allows you to generate enough mana to play, you guessed it, Aetherflux Reservoir, which then, once that's out, ends the game on the spot because you've cast your Sensei's Divining Top so many times that the subsequent next cast will be like 30 or 40 life apiece, allowing you to accrue enough to blast everybody at the table. Now, Shorikai was supposed to be my solution to that because I saw Josh Lee Kwai piloting it. He did a Reanimator sort of theme, but I wanted just a solution to my existing problems and woes with my artifact build. So I built Shorikai immediately after. I just sort of changed out the commander. And I will say I had a better play experience because it made the combo more consistent because I had draw just sitting in my command zone. But man, the play experience was miserable. I mean, if you want just combo, play in a high power pod, right? Like play borderline CEDH. But if you're playing with just buddies sitting around the table, it is so mind-numbingly boring to do the same combo over and over again. And everybody just goes, well, you got the top, you got the cost reducer, etc. We're just going to scoop because we know where this is going. And that's a terrible feeling because it's not exciting for anybody at the table. It's just you playing with yourself until you generate enough life. And it's not like the combo immediately ends it because there is always a chance that the reservoir is technically the bottom card of your library. And so it's just lame. I don't like it. I don't like the play style. I'll feel bad if this one has a little tear on the back, but you know what? It is what it is. I think these both are going to end up in E tier, actually. I would not put them in F, but they definitely are ending up in E tier. I cannot believe it's been like 30 minutes. Crazy. Up next is Will, Scion of Peace. We're going to breeze through this one. It's a good commander. It's consistent. It is one of those commanders that actually makes life gain a little bit more appealing. But it's also like a borderline combo commander because you're running a lot of effects that like double your life total or exchange life totals, etc. And I find that for me, the play experience wasn't that great. I think I would prefer much more of like a Soul Sister type of build. But Will is a good commander. If you want to give it a try, I have a video that goes over different deck list versions for him. They're good. People have told me in person that the deck lists are good. So give it a look. But he's going to wind up in C with the other guys. I don't know if I'll get to this before my camera dies, but it is Sauron the Dark Lord. Now, I made literally 8 different Sauron decks in a video. That video is sort of popped off. It's done quite well. This is a 7/6 Avatar Horror with Ward, sacrifice a legendary artifact or legendary creature. And then whenever an opponent casts a spell, amass orcs 1, so you amass an army. And whenever an army deals damage to a player, the ring tempts you. And whenever the ring tempts you, you can discard your hand and then draw 4. That last effect tends to be the best part about this card. There are different builds where you can do more of an army or reanimator type of build. If you want my full thoughts on it, I would really encourage you to watch my Sauron video. I put a lot of work into it. A lot of play testing went into that deck. That video, I want to say it actually took me over a month to produce because I had to test a bunch of different versions of the deck, figure out what worked and didn't. And then at the end of it, there was still like a few clerical errors in the decks. Like, do I really include this? It wasn't quite performing for me. But I think I wound up with a lot of deck lists that were very passable and they accomplished the goal in that specific theme that we were going for because this commander can just be built in so many different ways. I'm only going to grade it in one slot. I'm not going to give it like 4 different areas to, be on the board here. It's a powerful commander, but it's not really fun for me to play. And it's definitely not fun for people to play against, unfortunately, especially with that ward cost being so brutal. So I'm going to put it in C, and you can see that's my cop out, obviously. Well, all right. At this rate, we're going to be out of here in about 3 more hours. So buckle in, kids. Class is in session. We're up for Nira Wild Mage. So Nira is great. I love Nira, actually. So I love Izzet colors in general, but whenever anything allows you to sort of have like polymorph on a stick like this, I get kind of excited because I enjoy randomness in my games, and it also just happens to be in my favorite color pairing. Nira's 6 mana for a 2/7 human elf shaman. Interesting that it's a shaman. Whenever you cast a spell, you may put it on the bottom of the owner's library, your library. If you do, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-land card. You may cast it without paying its mana cost. Then the rest go on the bottom in a random order. This triggers once per turn. So here's the thing. People, I think, misplay this a lot. They assume that they can let the trigger go through. Like if they cast an opt, right, or something to set up the top of their deck, they're like, oh, well, I'll just let the trigger, fizzle, and then I'll just do it again because it's going to be, it's going to be triggered again because I'm casting a spell and I didn't do it. Doesn't work like that. You have to take the first trigger in order to actually get this ability. So if you have an opt and you cast, or you have this commander out when you cast the opt, you have to decide, do I want to just let the trigger fizzle, or do I want to actually, use, or do I want to use the trigger on Nira that's printed here? So this card is actually pretty nutty, pretty disgusting. My version of the deck, it's pretty sweet. You can actually look, there's a decked out episode where Airball plays Nira the Wild Mage, my list, and he does really well. He actually, spoilers, wins the episode. So I was pretty pumped about that. So if you want to see this deck actually in action, I would encourage you to go watch the decked out budget episode with Nira the Wild Mage in it. And I think honestly, it's going to go up in B tier. It's not quite A, but it's definitely a B tier. Man, what a throwback. Merkle, Lord of Bones. This card, everybody lost their mind when it got released because they're like, oh my God, we can break Devoted Druid. Finally, right? We can break Devoted Druid. I mean, who would have thunk that was possible? So this is a 7 mana and it's in Abzan colors for a 7/5. As long as your life total is less than or equal to half of your starting life total, it has indestructible. And whenever another non-token creature dies, you may exile it, create a token that's a copy, except it's an enchantment and loses all other card types. So why does it break Devoted Druid? Well, Devoted Druid has this neat little mechanic where you get to tap it for green and then put a -1 counter on it to untap it. So if it's an enchantment, it no longer has power and toughness like a creature. Therefore, it cannot die. Therefore, you have infinite green mana. We did it. Applause everywhere. But here's the thing. I liked this commander deck. I built it when it was sort of like first out. It was a bit newer, but it's such a heavily costed commander. And there's such sort of like not a narrow scope, but it needs a lot to go right in order for you to properly reap what you are sowing, that I felt like when people Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exile Merkle before I could do anything or before a trigger was on the stack, even if they're changing phases, let's say, it's just a total blowout. Like this card is so susceptible to removal. And I think it's going to end up in D as a result, because just like that, that's what the other ones suffer for in the D tier. Couple Rakdos commanders. Speaking of the namesake, it's Rakdos, Lord of Riots. It's a 6/6 demon for 4 mana. Pretty sick. You can't cast the spell unless an opponent lost life this turn. Easy. Don't worry about it, guys. Flying Trample. Creature spells you cast cost 1 less for each 1 life your opponents have lost this turn. This commander is, what's the right word? Mistakenly put into CEDH, quote unquote, comments. People are like, oh yeah, I build this as a CEDH commander. I'm not going to call out anybody in particular. There's a few people on the internet that say that. I don't think it falls into CEDH by any stretch, because what they're saying is there are certain cards like the Eldrazi that are colorless mana sourced cards that you can cast for 0 if your opponents have lost enough life. And that tends to be how this commander gets built. Now, when I built my version of the deck list, I didn't want to do that, because not only will this deck get absolutely demolished by anything remotely, resembling CEDH, because they'll just counter your commander, stifle the ability. Like they'll be able to get around it, is what I'm saying. Our purposes for this deck, or at least for me, was to just build a big demon tribal deck, and I think I succeeded. It did basically what I wanted it to do in Rakdos colors with the cost reduction, and I'm quite happy with how it turned out. The play style was a little bit redundant. It definitely doesn't make it into B tier, but it's going to go into C tier for me. Another Rakdos commander, it is Witch King Sky Scourge. So this guy is a Wraith Noble 5/5 flyer. Whenever you attack with 1 or more Wraiths, exile the top X of your library, where X is their total power. You may play them this turn, and this card has Undying. Whenever it dies, if it had no 1/1 counters on it, return it with a 1/1 counter. Man, this card is good. I like this commander a lot. I had a lot of fun playing the deck. It was unfortunately just a, what do you call it? You can have 9 of them in your deck, the Ring Wraiths. It was a Ring Wraith deck. And it's kind of, how do I want to say it? It's kind of linear, you know, like if you're running 9 of the same card in your deck, there's a lot less variance, which in some ways makes the deck a lot better. But for me, it made the deck a lot more boring because it was just me playing them out, playing cost reduction effects, getting this guy out, exiling the top 20 of my library, hitting some type of combo, board wipe, removal, whatever I needed in that moment, and then just taking over the game from there if people didn't have an answer for it. And that's just not the type of play experience that I'm going for. And also, this card is extremely susceptible to exile-based removal, which there is a lot of floating around in our format right now. So unfortunately, I ended up taking it apart relatively quickly after building it because either I just took over the game and dominated, or I got blown out and lost really easily, which unfortunately happened more often, which is why I ended up taking it apart. So if your play group doesn't have as much white, for instance, or a lot of exile-based removal, it might be worth giving it a look because it can get around single targeted removal or damage-based like effects or Wrath of God effects. But if it gets exiled, you're kind of screwed. So if you like that type of play style, like sort of an all or nothing sort of heavy hitter, you can use this commander as sort of like your Lord of the Rings evil guy commander if you don't want to build Sauron. I think you give it a look, but for me, it's going to wind up in C. We're going to need a bigger board. Man, remember when I said that I was going to spend 1 minute on them? I obviously have a lot to say. Volo, Guide to Monsters. It is a 4-mana Simic commander. Let's see. Do I know his stat line? Is he a 3/3? Damn it, he's a 3/2. I knew it. And then whenever you cast a creature spell that does not share a creature type with a creature you control or one in your graveyard, copy that spell. Man, fan favorite commander right here. So for myself and my fiance actually got into the game and started playing this deck almost exclusively for quite a while. It was either this or Lathril, and we'll get into Lathril later. And this commander is great. Honestly, a lot of newer players could sort of gravitate towards something like this because the commander just says, you cast creature, you put another one into play. It's very straightforward. And then typically the type of effects that I played, the type of creatures that I put into the deck were straightforward. The effect was printed right there. There was no tutoring out of the deck. It was just a lot of token generation, double your tokens, triple your tokens, make a ton of big thing, hit your opponent, kill them. And honestly, it was great. I really think that this is one of those commanders that's a bit evergreen. Like you could come back to this in like a few years from now when they've printed sort of new and exciting creature cards to fit into this sort of menagerie style build, I would call it. And in that circumstance, I think that for me at least, it's actually going to be the first one that ends up in A. I just have so many good memories of this, and the fact that like I can think of my fiance laughing maniacally as she murders me with like a million power with Blossoming Bog Beast and, you know, the Ronus, the green Ronus or whatever. That's a snake god, whatever that is. It's hilarious to me. I have a lot of great memories associated with it. And if you're looking for just a generically strong commander, especially with a lot of new releases with certain creature types, I think it's worth a look, quite honestly. So give Volo a try. We have our first commander in A. Will it be another? It is Niv Mizzet Perun. I have the special art because I'm a degenerate. It is 6 mana, 3 blue pip, 3 red pip. Very expensive. But it cannot be countered, importantly. And it's a 5/5 flyer. And it has dragon and wizard typing. All great. But whenever you draw, Niv Mizzet Perun deals 1 damage to any target. Whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery, you draw a card. So this also triggers off of your opponents. So not only will you self-enable it with your Spellslinger type of deck, but your opponents will also be enabling it if they try to, let's say, remove it with the Swords to Plowshares, which means you get to respond first, drawing and then pinging something which has to be resolved first. Then you can respond to it. There's been numerous times, actually, where I top-decked a counterspell or top-decked something to protect my commander in that moment because this commander plays on the stack like a menace. I will say this commander in particular sits higher for me, and it's going to get a top grade in A because it got me into the game. Do I think it deserves to be an A? I think it depends on your play group. If you're playing in more competitive pods, I know that Tomer from MTG Goldfish, for instance, uses this as a CDH commander. Maybe it can sort of sit in that higher stature, but in general, I think it's just a difficult commander to bring to any like FNM or, you know, game night with your friends because Niv Mizzet Parun is lethal. It's a really hard commander to play around and play against, unless you're specifically holding up removal for turn over turn over turn, and you're not removing the other threats that I'll be playing out on the board, like an Archmage Emeritus or whatever. So use some caution when you play it, but for me, it's going to get an A just because I really love the commander, and it's what got me into the game. So let's talk about some Gruul commanders. Raga Draga Gorgut's Boss, 4 mana. Each creature with a mana ability gets +2/+2. For those of you who don't know, a mana ability is anything that produces mana. So Llanowar Elves, Elvish Mystic, Boreal Druid, think about all that type of stuff. Whenever a creature you control with a mana ability attacks, untap it. Pseudo Vigilance, and you're buffing the team. Already great. But whenever you cast a spell, if at least 7 mana was spent to cast it, untap target creature and it gains +7/+7 and trample until end of turn. Wow. This card is disgusting. It is nutty. It is crazy. I would encourage you to check out my version of the deck list on my Archidect because it's really, really good. This commander is crazy consistent because you have a lot of mana generation effects in the deck stapled onto creatures. So you have bodies, you have good blockers because it's going to buff your stuff, and it has a finisher printed on your commander. So this sort of suffers from like the more modern type of like commander printings that we've been seeing lately where everything is on one card. But my God, this does it so well. And I don't see a lot of people playing it. So I'd really encourage you guys to give it a look because I think it's very fair, honestly, even with tutors and Finale of Devastations and all that type of stuff, because it's Gruul monsters, basically. So give it a look. I think it's worth it to try it, and it's going to go in B tier. Chishiro, the Shattered Blade, 4 in Gruul. Whenever an aura or equipment ETB is under your control, make a 2/2 red spirit with Menace. At the beginning of your end step, put a 1/1 counter on each modified creature you control. I built this as a Post Malone sort of response. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It's on my channel. But basically, I just wanted to take a look at Post Malone's version and then modify it to sort of be better or do better than the list that he had. And admittedly, he was going through a lot. If you go back and you watch his gameplay episodes, he was going through a lot in the deck production side of things because he's obviously a very wealthy man and he has a lot of money to spend on the game. But Game Nights doesn't want it to just be pay to win. They want to represent the game as it is. And so he had to dial it back. And I think that his deck list took a lot of hits as a result. But I think that this commander is really actually quite great. It does a lot for you. It enables you to make more tokens on the board. You're also running a lot of effects in here and other creatures that synergize with that type of effect. So you're going to have something on the board in the event that your commander gets removed, meaning that you have an equipped target for your various auras and equipment if this commander gets removed. And it can either go in the way of Voltron or more in the way of token generation and doubling up on your tokens. I think it's versatile enough, honestly, for me, to actually make it into the B tier with Raga Draga. Maybe I just have a soft spot for green in my heart, but it's quite good, actually, and it's very fair. All right, Simic, Bonnie Paul Clear Cutter just came out. I built a commander deck for this, and I've since taken it apart, but my God, is this commander good. It's a 6/5 reacher, and whenever it ETBs, you make Bow, which is a legendary blue ox with its power toughness or equal to the number of lands. And whenever you attack, draw, then put a land from your hand onto, or from your graveyard onto the battlefield. So you get the selection of hand or graveyard. This commander is nutty. If you run the appropriate fetch lands in this deck, you just get to recur them basically for free. It also draws you, and your Bow, which is the ox, gets huge. And if you're running effects like a Garruk's Uprising, for instance, everything will have trample, and the deck just works. That's what I'm going to say. The deck just works, and for that reason, it's going to go into C tier. All right, Nethroi, Apex of Death. This is a 2 mana and Abzan commander with Mutate for 7 mana, so you can mutate it. And I'm not going to go over all of the interactions with Mutate here, but it also has Death Touch and Lifelink, so really great abilities for 5 mana, and it's a 5/5. Nice. And whenever it mutates, return any number of target creatures with total power 10 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Not tapped, just return them. So I made this deck actually for a budget night that we had, and I built it, like 2 years ago now, I think. And it was good. I think that, unfortunately, at that time, I wasn't quite as experienced of a deck builder as I am now. So it was a bit clunky. So my perception is a little bit skewed on the commander. I think that a fair rating for this commander, given what I know now, is probably the C tier because it's not a degenerate, broken, crazy Reanimator commander. It's just like fairly statted, fairly costed, and it has a different mechanic that enables it, which is the mutate. Plus, I really like the Biolant Plant Beast Form version of it, which is what's going to get stuck up here. Yeah, everybody yell at me in the comments. Another 3-color commander, it is Isu the Abominable. So it's a Yeti commander, and I think that the lore is actually Benjamin Wheeler from Loading Ready Run said something to Gavin Verhey about getting a Yeti commander in the next set, and then lo and behold, here it is, Isu. You can look at the top card of your library anytime. It's a 5/5, by the way. And you may play snow lands and cast snow spells from the top. So anything that's instant sorcery, artifact, etc., it can be cast. Whenever another snow permanent, that's the difference, ETBs under your control, you may pay either green or white or blue. If you do, you put a 1/1 counter on Isu. Commander is okay. Unfortunately for me, I wanted to go with like a snowball fight theme. So I was like, oh, I'm going to put the fight spells in here. I'm going to put as much snow stuff as I can. But as you will realize when you build this commander, snow stuff generally sucks. It's quite bad. I think that this commander will benefit from another printing of a bunch of snow stuff. So the next time you see Snowlands roll around, like when they do Kaldheim version 2 or whatever set had Snowlands before, I think that it's going to get substantially better. And at that point, I would give it a look. I don't think I'm being too harsh when I give it this ranking, but I'm going to put it all the way in D tier because really the effect is good to play lands off the top, but I don't know why I would be playing this if I'm just looking for a Courser of Crewfix effect, if that makes sense. It doesn't really do what you want it to do most of the time, unfortunately. And for that reason, I think it ends up in D tier. Oh, man. Atla Palani Nest Tender, 1 and Naya for a 2/3 human shaman, 2 and tap. Make a 0/1 green egg with defender. Cannot attack. Whenever an egg you control dies, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature. Put that onto the battlefield and the rest go on the bottom in a random order. Man. What a good commander. This is actually one of the first commanders that I built when I was getting into the game. Immediately successful. I actually transitioned from a Karametra deck to this deck, which I think Karametra is actually in here that we're going to go over. But the Atla Palani of old that I built, I have very fond memories of it. And it was actually really emotional when I took the deck apart. My fiance really didn't want me to because it was just one of the old holdover commanders. But I'm like, Allie, I have $700 of cards in this deck and we don't play it. So I think we need to take it apart. So Alaplani eventually got the axe, but really great commander. And if you've never experienced what this commander can do, I would encourage you to play it. And for my purposes, it's going to go into B tier. Slimefoot and Squee. So this is a Jund commander, which Jund, Nelson Salahub, if you ever want to play with me, I'm your guy. Slimefoot and Squee Jund, Fungus, Goblin, pretty sweet typing, 3/3. Whenever it ETBs or attacks, make a 1/1 Saproling. And I wanted to make a Saproling deck work so bad, so I wanted to jam this commander, so I built it. And then you can pay 1 plus Grixis, sack a Saproling, return this and up to 1 other target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Activate only as a sorcery. Now, that last part really kills this card somewhat, the activating only as a sorcery. And unfortunately, this is another one of those commanders that suffers from not having some type of sack outlet at all times. If I didn't have a Phyrexian Altar, an Ashnod's Altar, a Viscera Seer, you name it, it really didn't work that well. Now, you can build this deck in a lot of ways. I decided to go with more of a Saproling heavy / self-mill type of route. And I don't think that was really the most appropriate decision for this commander. It suffered a lot just by being in sort of that archetype, I think. I think what you would more so want is either a heavy focus on the Saprolings or just a dead heavy focus on Reanimator, where you're just tutoring things out, cheating them into play with getting this guy into your graveyard, and also probably running a lot of tutors to get to your Phyrexian Altars and all that type of stuff. But I don't run a lot of tutors, and for my purposes, I think that it's going to end up in... Oh, this is a tough one. I know it's a cop-out. I'm putting him in C tier. Nobody get angry at me. All right, it's going in A tier. It is Xyrus, the Writhing Storm. My God, I love this commander. It is 2 in Teamer, For a 3/5 Leviathan Snake, pretty sick typing, and it has flying. Why? Because it's a snake on a plane, bitch. And whenever an opponent draws a card except for the first one that they draw on each of their draw steps, you make a 1/1 green snake creature token. Whenever it deals damage to a player, you and that player draw that many cards. This commander is so sick. You can build it sort of Voltron-y heavy with a bunch of cantrips to buff it. You can build it like I did, whereupon you are wheeling all of your opponents at once with Wheel of Fortune type effects to generate, you guessed it, 21 snakes at one time. And honestly, people want this card to stick around for a turn cycle because they want to be attacked by it. So people are very easy to make deals with because you say, hey, low ceiling here, friend. I'm just going to play this commander out and then attack you next turn. Please don't remove it because you're the one that's saying that you have removal. There's so many ways to politic with this commander, and it really expanded my perspective on what was possible with this game. If you can see a theme here, I love green, blue, and red, and it's all of my favorite colors wrapped up in one pie. So up in A tier it goes. All right, the Gitrog Ravenous Ride. It is a new card. It is 3 in Golgari for a 6/5 Frog Horror Mutant with Trample and Haste. That's important. Whenever it deals damage to a player, you may sacrifice a creature that saddled it this turn. And it only saddles for 1, by the way, so you can saddle it with basically everything. If you do, you draw X, and then you put up to X lands from your hand onto the battlefield tapped, where X is the sacrifice creature's power. Wow, this deck is crazy. So I built it for a friend of mine, and he actually ran the list to great success. Every game was a game, importantly. And I think that's something important to point out with some of these commanders is some of them up here, that is their deciding factor. Every game is a game. You get to play Magic the Gathering. You're not mana screwed. You're not stuck. You can't progress your game plan. The Gitrog says, play a land on turn 1, ramp me on turn 2, play out a threat on turn 3, like a 7/7, whatever, 3 mana card. Turn 5, play me, swing with the Gitrog, sacrifice the 7 powered creature, draw 7, dump lands onto the battlefield, win the game after that. That's what the Gitrog says. It's so good. I would highly encourage you to give it a look and try it out if you're looking for a high power ceiling commander, because this is definitely high power. Keep that in mind. But it's a lot of fun, and I'll see if I can put my deck list down below for you guys to look at. Perhaps one of the most annoyingly worded / built commanders of the last year for me was Nine Fingers Keen. It is 1 and Sultai, black, green, blue for a human rogue 4/4 with Menace and Ward, pay 9 life. Whenever it deals damage, combat damage to a player, you look at the top 9 of your library and you can put a gate from among them onto the battlefield. Then if you controlled 9 or more gates, just simply put the rest into your hand. Otherwise, put the rest in the bottom in a random order. Here's the problem. This card, in my experience, rarely got to attack, rarely got to stick around because everybody's afraid of it. Everybody's afraid that I'm going to Maze's End them or whatever. And I actually got to a point where I took out Maze's End from the deck, which if you don't know, that's sort of the win con with gates. If you have 10 or more gates, when you activate the ability of Maze's End, it goes back to your hand. And guess what? You just win the game. There's no combat damage. You just win. And so I won 10 games or more with this commander. I think I made a video about it. And it's disgusting. It's difficult to play against. It's difficult to play around because you can also play lockout effects like Glacial Chasm or strip mine them to strip lock your opponents out of the game. It's annoying, I'll be honest. And I ended up taking it apart. I'm not going to rebuild it. And I would really encourage you to use some caution when you build commanders like this that are heavily land focused. And in particular, heavily land focused for their win condition, because that means it's very difficult for the average casual player in casual table to actually deal with this commander. Sorry if I'm getting heated about it, but it's actually going to go in D tier because it's very deadly effective, but it does not meet any of my requirements or things that I look for in a fun commander I'm going to keep around and build further. All right, guys, and that's it for the commanders that I actually have a physical card for. We're on to paper now. I hope that you can see them just fine. And we're going to jump right into that in 1 second. All right, so you're going to get a 2-parter here. So when the, Warhammer precons came out, I was pumped. I bought the Necron precon pretty much right away because I was just enticed by the mono black artifact build. And the face commander for that is Sazarek, the Silent King. There you go. It's a 4 mana with 3 black pip, 3/4 Necron flyer. And whenever it attacks, mill 3, and then you can put an artifact or vehicle from among them milled this way into your hand. It's interesting because this card on the face is card advantage. It's cheap. You get it out for 4 mana at an earlier stage. It has built-in evasion with flying, so you're routinely going to be able to trigger it and fill your graveyard. I just didn't really have a great play experience with it. And I think it's because there were so many different commanders like this one in the deck that sort of have different things that they kind of want to do, and they synergize well when they're all sort of on the board together, but by themselves the deck felt a little bit disjointed. For that reason, I think Sazerac is actually going to go in D tier for me. I just didn't have a great play experience with it, and I thought maybe it's a me problem. How about I build Imhotep the Stormlord? So I took the initial deck, I just swapped this commander in first, didn't have a good time, so I said, you know what, I'm going to build a dedicated mono black artifact deck independent of the precon. And this is a 4 mana, a 3/3 Necron, and it has Pharaon. Whenever one or more artifact cards leave your graveyard, you make 2 black Necron artifact creature tokens. Sick. Love that ability. That's why I wanted to build it. And it also has Grand Strategist. At the beginning of combat on your turn, another target artifact creature gets +2/+2 and menace until end of turn. So I had a better play experience with it, but not a good play experience, unfortunately. I just don't think I really found the code to crack it. I'm not going to waste your time talking about all the interactions because, quite frankly, I don't remember every little card that I had in the list, but I just remember it not being enjoyable. I think it's better than Sazerac, though. So Sazerac is going to wind up in D, and Imhotep is going to end up in C, if anything, for just having a cooler name. How about we stay on theme? We'll talk about the Tyrannid deck. So the Swarm Lord, it's 3 in Temur. Everybody knows how I feel about Temur. Here's the difference. I actually bought this deck to just play one-on-one with my fiance. I really was excited at the time. I was really getting deep into Magic, and I was like, you know what? This commander looks sick, and I know my fiance sort of inside and out. She loves big, dumb green shit stuff, and this card fits the bill. So it has rapid regeneration, and it gets ETBs with 2 1/1 counters on it for each time you've cast it from the command zone. So it'll enter first as a 7/7, which is pretty good for 6 mana, and also has Xenos Cunning. Whenever a creature you control with a counter on it dies, draw a card. I think that this commander is actually quite good. I wouldn't say it's slept on, but it's very good. It's very consistent. You could just take the precon and have a really consistently good time with it, like my fiance did, or you could upgrade it into something for relatively cheap. And, you know, for that reason, I think because of the accessibility, the utility of the commander, the affordability as well, because it's not that expensive to build out a deck for this commander in my experience, I'm actually going to put it up in B. I think it's actually that good, genuinely. Man, one of a contentious type of video. It's Indominus Rex Alpha. It is a 5 mana commander, so it is 1 and then 2 hybrid blue-black, so Dimir hybrid, and then 2 forests. It'll be up on screen so you can fully see it. And it's a dinosaur mutant for 6/6. When it ETBs, discard any number of creatures. It enters the battlefield with a flying counter if the discarded card had flying. And then the same is true for first strike, double strike, death touch, hexproof, haste, indestructible, lifelink, menace, reach, trample, and vigilance. And then when it ETBs, draw a card for each counter on it. So here's the interesting thing. So when this commander ETBs, I'm trying to remember exactly. You can go back and watch my Indominus Rex video to get the full unabridged version of what I'm about to tell you. The abilities are going to stack essentially. So it's going to enter with those counters. So it literally says it enters with a flying counter, etc., etc. And then the ability goes on the stack to draw a card for each kind of counter on it. So if you have a card that, let's say, doubles the number of counters on it, then that means you can, in response to the trigger, activate this card, double the flying counters, vigilance counters, whatever, because you can have multiple of the same counter on the card. No rule says you can't. In fact, rules say that you can, and then you can draw for each type of counter, because it doesn't specify each type of counter. It actually says each counter on it. So this card basically just reads like 5 mana plus an additional 1 or 2, instant speed thing in your hand to double the types of counters on it, draw like 20. It's pretty crazy. So I think it's a good deck. It's a little bit confusing, but I think for my purposes, it's going to wind up in C tier based on my experience with it. We're going to make this one quick because it's a good commander pairing. It's Frodo, Adventurous Hobbit, and then Sam, Loyal Attendant. I only printed off one of them. Listen, I got to save ink, guys. Come on. It's a Halfling Scout. This is the one that really makes the deck tick and helps you sort of get over the finish line. So I'll just review this one. It's a 1/3 with Vigilance. And whenever it attacks, if you gained 3 or more life this turn, the ring tempts you. Super easy to do because Sam, Loyal Attendant, helps with your food generation. And then if Frodo is your ring bearer and the ring has tempted you 2 or more times this game, draw a card. So low to the ground, Hobbit food deck. That's basically what I bought, and then I modified it for a video. And I'll be honest, it was a fantastic deck. It's super good, super consistent. You can play it right out of the box and you can have a good time with this deck. The same is true for Eowyn. My friend has an Eowyn deck right out of the box and it was great. And for a lot of people, it actually steamrolls. It does some crazy shenanigans. I think for me, I don't have a ton of personal experience. I played it a few times, but I think I played it enough to throw it up in B tier. And remember, this is partnered with Sam. So that is the caveat here. I don't have both of them to go up here, but it's partnered with Sam. A new commander that none of you have actually seen yet. It is Gargos, Vicious Watcher. I built this deck for my fiance. I already said that she has a love of big, dumb green things. Guess what? This is big, dumb green stapled onto a card a dozen times with a dozen heads, and it never stops. So it is 6 mana, 3 green, green, green for a Hydra. 8/7 with Vigilance. Great stat line already. Great ability. Hydras you cast cost 4 less to cast. My God. And then whenever a creature you control becomes a creature, not just this one, becomes the target of a spell. Not spell or ability. It has to be a spell. This card fights one target creature you do not control. This card is damn ridiculous. Like, I personally haven't played it a lot. I built the deck for my fiance, but watching her play it, it is insane. The things that this deck can do, the amount of mana that it can generate at early stages, like turn 6, 20 plus mana, plus cost reduction, plus X is equal to 1,000,000 is crazy. The 4 cost reduction that Gargos gives you actually goes into X because it's a part of determining the final value of X. It takes into account cost reduction and things that add to the cost, which make it more expensive to cast. So X being reduced by 4 turns into a ton of 1/1 counters in some crazy situations. So if you're looking for big dumb deck that does big dumb things, check this out and give it to somebody you love because they will steamroll the table, I guarantee you. Speaking of B tier, see what I did there? It's Gearson Star and Kellermorph. 3 mana. It is an Izzet commander. Sits close in my heart with Ward 2. Thanks, Gavin Verhey. And whenever another source you control deals exactly 1 damage to a permanent or player, this card replaces that or it deals 2 damage rather to that. So it deals 1 and then replaces it to 1 plus 2. How should I say this? This card's disgusting. Let's put it that way. Because it's cheap. It's 3 mana to get out. There's a lot of things like End the Festivity type of effects that just ping everything for 1 damage. You can put a bunch of pingers in the deck because it doesn't have to be instant or sorcery. It can be any source. So if you want to run your Tim-like effects in the deck, that means you can. So you can build this more instant sorcery heavy. You can build it more pinger heavy with untap effects. That is busted and broken. This card enables certain things to happen which normally would never be able to happen, and I kind of just love that. Being able to make certain tapper abilities like that extraordinarily viable, even outside of infinite combo, is great. So I would actually highly rate this card. It's going to go in B, like I mentioned. I sort of posited that, but in B for Gearson Star. Another new commander that you guys have yet to see, but will be coming out in another video because there was actually somebody that challenged me at a local game store to make this deck happen, and that is Halar the Firefletcher. It's an uncommon. It is 1 in Gruul for a 3/3 elf archer with trample. Whenever you cast a spell, if it was kicked, you put a 1/1 counter on Halar, and then it deals damage equal to the number of 1/1 counters to each opponent. Pretty good. I have mixed opinions about the deck, but I'm still finalizing my version of it, and I don't want to give too much away. So much so that I think I'm going to throw this card into C tier, but there's a very real chance it'll make it into B tier in a future world when I've done a little bit more testing. But as with all things, great things take time. Let's put it that way. As with all great things, they take time. So Halar the Firefletcher is going to go into C tier. I don't want to say too much about it as to not spoil anything, but it's fun. And it lets you play kicker cards. It's just the matter of determining the density of kicker cards in order to make the deck work. But more on that in a future video. This is another one. Actually, you probably have already seen the video. It is Disa the Restless. It is a human scout. It is 2+ Jund. Whenever a Lurgoyf permanent card is put into your graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, put it onto the battlefield. So you just cheat it into play for free. Seems pretty good. And whenever one or more creatures you control deal damage to a player, you make a Tarmogoyf token. So I was excited to build this just for the Tarmogoyf token, but incidentally, you sort of realize that this card is disgusting, especially with a lot of built-in self-mill and these other effects that have come out recently, like Aftermath and Analyst and that type of thing. You just get incidental value for having this on the board whenever you mill yourself. You get things back from the graveyard, and on top of that, you get to then swing, especially if you have haste enabling in your deck, which there's a lot of it in red and green, by the way, and then you get to make more Tarmogoyf tokens. And then it's a self-feeding loop, because then you have Tarmogoyf out, you can protect your board with things like Heroic Intervention to hopefully get back to your turn. It's really good. And you can also power this deck up because you're in black. You have access to all of your, favorite tutors, etc. It's genuinely a lot of fun to play, but I don't think it's powerful enough or consistent enough for me to put it in B tier. I'm going to throw it in C, but I think it could be upwards of a B tier for you. So if you haven't already watched it, go back and watch my video on DISA once you're done with this video. So if you're one of those few people that tuned into my stream, this is from you. This is Death Leaper Terror Weapon. It is 2 and Gruul for a Tyrannid, legendary creature, 3/3. It has Flash, by the way, and Haste. Pretty cool. Creatures you control that entered the battlefield this turn have double strike. So I have another commander coming up at a later stage. I don't believe it's here. It's not. I have another commander coming up at a later stage in the latter half of this video. It's Smoot of Noctamen, or whatever the pronunciation is, and it's very similar. It's a hasty Gruul deck, and it turns out a hasty Gruul deck is quite good, and it's even better when the cards have double strike. So this commander goes vice versa into Smoot, as Death Leaper vice versa goes into it, and this card is actually pretty disgusting. So I actually built the deck live streaming for this person, or I modified the deck during the live stream, and then I decided I wanted to give it a try myself. So I ran the deck, and it turns out it's a lot of fun when you have routine access to the exact colors you need because you're in green, fixing yourself at all times with effects like Nature's Lure and Farseek. It basically enables you to constantly have access to everything at all times, and then you can flash things in and haste things in, surprise the board, get in for a ton of damage in one turn. And if you're that type of deck build, you can also run the extra combats, which close the game out very quickly thereafter. It's very consistent, and it's a lot of fun, honestly. I think I'm actually going to throw it up in B tier because it was a surprise. I didn't expect it to be as fun or as consistent as it was, and I think that's really why it's going to go up there. All right. Here it is. A commander that is fighting for one of the lower spots in my list. It is Dromoka the Eternal. It is a Selesnya dragon, 5 mana for a 5/5 flyer. Rate's pretty good, but whenever a dragon you control attacks, bolster 2. Choose a creature with the least toughness among creatures you can control and put 2 1/1 counters on it. So I built this list because of, what's his name? Dana from, Dana from It. That guy. He recommended the Selesnya dragon list with Dromoka the Eternal. I was immediately excited about the idea and decided that, yes, I am going to build that and I'm going to make it good. So I built a Selesnya dragon list, and I actually based it off of his list because he was, toting that it was really great, a lot of fun. And I don't know if we just played different lists or if he modified his differently. I decided I was going to modify my list because it just doesn't work. And it continues to not work. I did not have a good play experience with this. You're playing a lot of suboptimal dragons, let's call it, because you're in the Selesnya colors, but that's kind of the draw is you're playing a suboptimal list. You're trying to make good. So I just can't recommend it, honestly. It just doesn't really do it for me. I thought it was going to be better than it was, and it just isn't. So I'm actually going to throw it in E. Hate to say it. I don't think it quite makes it into F, but it's definitely an E tier commander for me personally. A few more and I get a break. I get freed so I can go eat food before I resume this. It is Ellie and Alan, paleontologists. So this is another Bant commander. So it's 2 green, white, blue for a human scientist. It should have been human scientists. It is a 2/5. I guess that would have been difficulty with ruling, huh? It's a tap, exile a creature card from your graveyard, and then discover X, where X is the mana value of that card, and it can be only activated as a sorcery. So in order to discover, you exile from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card with that mana value or less. Cast it without paying its mana cost, or put it into your hand. The rest go on the bottom in a random order. Great. I was very impressed with this list. I enjoyed playing it. It's consistent. It's fun. It's actually okay for newer players. I gave the deck list to a few newer players, and they had a fine time with it as well. I think it's just one of those middling decks where it's not going to like really impress the crowd, let's call it, but it's good enough to keep up with faster decks and actually pose a routine threat on the board. And you're in green, so you get to fix yourself with, again, the Farseek, nature lore effects, etc. It just makes the deck more consistent, which is something that I love. And for that reason, it's going to go into C tier. You know, I have a love-hate relationship with pirates, and no, not the modern day kind that steals, you know, a $1.99 movie from a mega corporation. Those ones I'm fine with. The ones I'm not fine with are these ones in Commander. I just haven't really been able to make them work in the way that I want them to work. And moreover, it's not that exciting of an archetype for me. I thought I was going to like it more. And Admiral Brass Unsinkable, which is 2 and then Grixis, I thought was going to sort of be my solution to that, because she ETBs and then you mill 4. Good effect. And then at the beginning of combat on your turn, you may return a target pirate from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. And that's at the beginning of combat. And then its base power and toughness becomes 4/4, and it gains haste until end of turn. There's a lot of infinite combos you can do with this deck. There's a lot of pirates that want you, like Port Razor, for instance, to take extra combats after it deals damage. And I didn't have fun with the deck. I don't know any other way to say it. Like, if that's too ambiguous, I'm sorry, but I just didn't have fun playing the deck. I was playing a lot of pirates, which otherwise have abilities that are a little bit lackluster for me personally. So I'm going to throw it in D tier. It definitely doesn't deserve E. Honestly, it probably could be higher if you like the archetype more. But for my purposes, I just didn't really enjoy it. And for that reason, it's going to go into D tier. All right, got to shake it off. We're almost there. My camera battery's almost dead again. Aslas, the Swelling Scourge. It is 3 mana. This is a new card, brand new. Video on it probably before this one even came out. Whenever it or another colorless creature dies, you get an experience counter. Then you can pay Wooburg. Creatures you control get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of experience counters you have. Scions and Spawns gain Indestructible and Annihilator 1 until end of turn. Wow, this commander is impressive. It brings back experience counters in a big way. You can reliably play some of the older experienced commanders in order to generate that excessive or accessory value on top of just having this commander out. Something like the Golgari one. What's its name? Come on, guys. You got this. What is it? It's not Disa. It is... Oh, God. It's not Dinah. It's not Disa. It is whatever the one is that you can... Marin. It's Marin of Clan of Neltoth. That commander... Or not commander, but that card in this commander deck is disgusting. I've been very impressed with this specific deck. I would really encourage you to check out the video that I did on it. And if you want, I would encourage you to give the deck a try because I really have quite enjoyed it. It's been my favorite Wooburg deck that I've ever played. And I think for that reason, honestly, I'm going to put it all the way up in A tier. I know, surprising, right? This came out of nowhere. Another Gruul deck. Can you tell I have a type? It's a Baloth Baratil Entertainer. It's an Elf Shaman, 2/5. Creatures your opponents control with power less than this are goated. Sick. And then whenever a goated, attacking, or blocking creature dies, you make a treasure. Also sick. What background did I choose? I chose Raised by Giants, which makes the commander's toughness and power 10/10. It's just statically that. And that combined with Baloth resulted in hilarious games. I have a great memory where I played this commander in an 8-pod. Yes, you heard me right. 8 people in one game. And I was the arch nemesis for the entire time because I was able to have my redirects handy, like not deflecting swap, but the other one that's just 1 mana if you have a creature with X amount of power on the board, whatever that is, plus my other redirects and counter spells. I had Tybalt's Trickery in this deck, etc. And the deck was just good. Like, it just did the thing reliably. And honestly, it was a joy to play. But the problem was I was basically the arch enemy every game, all game, because nobody wants to just keep attacking with their creatures. They want to reserve them, for end step on somebody else's turn or whatever. So all of a sudden, you become the bad guy, and all of the people that are, goated end up teaming up against you, where they'll say, hey, I'll block your creature favorably. So then on my turn, I can swing at you and you can block my creature favorably. It results in a lot of situations where the whole table teams up against you. And honestly, if you like that, play this commander. It's going to get the job done. And honestly, I had a great time playing it, but it doesn't quite make the cut into A. It's going to wind up in B. Last one, then I get a break. I'm free from you guys for a little while. It's Davros, Dalek Creator, 1 in Grixis for 3/4 Menace. And at the beginning of your end step, you make a 3/3 black Dalek artifact token with Menace. If an opponent lost 3 or more life this turn, then each opponent who lost 3 or more life faces a villainous choice. You draw a card or that player discards a card. Generically good, strong commander. I messed up in my video that I did on Davros, where unfortunately I mentioned that you make 3 Daleks. You do not. You make 1 Dalek. And I pinned the comment that corrected me because in my testing, I was playing it like that. And, nobody corrected me. Nobody caught it. They just trusted that I was making the right decision, which is the downside, I guess, of doing videos like this, is you think you understand things, then you make a mistake. I owned up to the mistake. I pinned the comment. This commander is still good. And the villainous choice mechanic is one where if you are a fan of Doctor Who, you're going to love it. So I think Davros is interesting. For me, it's not really highly up there. It's not like a highly tiered commander in my mind, just because I don't have a lot of the same sentiment to Doctor Who as other people do. But it's a fun commander. It's powerful. It's in Grixis, so you can just build standard Grixis stuff and have a good time doing so. I think it's just generically good. So for that reason, I'm going to throw it in C tier. It's not overpowered, but you could certainly build it in that way. And for my purposes, C tier it is. All right, so I'm praying that we're in focus right now because I had to reset a little bit. I had to recharge my camera. You know how it goes. But we're going to start off hot. So I want to talk about Orvar the All-Form. So Orvar is really quite cool. It's a 4-mana, 3/3 mono blue shapeshifter with Changeling, meaning it's every creature type. And then whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, if it targets 1 or more other permanents you control, you make a token that's a copy of one of those permanents. And then whenever a spell or ability control that an opponent controls causes you to discard this card, create a token that's a copy of target permanent. So I am not going to go into full detail about this commander. There is way too much to go into. Check out my video, though. I'm very proud of how that Orvar video turned out. There was only one error, which is the Throne of Eldraine, which was new at the time. I had not done full testing with it yet, and I included it in the deck. I didn't realize it actually does not combo in the way that I think it combos. So I would just keep Gilded Lotus in the deck instead of Throne of Eldraine. But this deck is awesome because it's a high skill ceiling in order to actually get in and, figure out how the deck functions. And then also requires a lot on you, the person who's piloting the deck, to actually sort of get over the finish line with it and actually make a win happen. Ton of fun. It's very rules heavy, so please check out my video if you're interested in an Orvar build. But this is going, I'm tempted to put it in A. I'm going to put it between them. It's actually so good. It's getting a slot almost up in A, but because it's so combo heavy, I'm going to pull it down a little bit. It's between A and B. There you go. There he is, right in between. All right, you guys are getting another twofer. So it's probably my favorite commander of all time, which is Ovika, which is just an incredible commander. You guys have heard me talk about it before. I'm not going to go into crazy detail, but why am I doing 2? That's really the important part. So I'm doing 2 because one of them is instant and sorcery tribal, which is Spellslinger, just another word for Spellslinger. And then the other one is actually, I don't know if I want to spoil it. I have to. I only have 100 lists. It is Ovika Is It Enchantress. So I may or may not have made a video about this before this one comes out, so I don't know if it's going to be spoiling anything. It is literally an Is It Enchantress deck. It is all red and blue enchantments. There's some artifacts in there as well, but primarily the bread and the butter is enchantments, and it is so much fun. I went through the past, I think 3 months making edits to this deck in order to get it to a point that I was happy with so I could recommend it to you guys. And this deck kicks ass, and it doesn't feel as bad as playing the Spellslinger version, because the Spellslinger version, quite frankly, is degenerate. I love it because I'm a degenerate, but the Enchantress deck feels more fair to play against, and there's still a good amount of nuance in the deck. I'm not going to go into full detail. Make sure you watch my Is It Enchantress video when that one comes out. So the Ovika Is It Enchantress is up top there, and then my other regular Ovika Spellslinger is in B, just because I think it's too strong for most pods, and it oddly doesn't really fit into CDH, so it's kind of in a gray zone. That's why I chose those rankings. All right, I wanted to pick out an easy one next. It's Nadu Winged Wisdom. F tier, moving on. All right, well, after that stellar analysis that I just put out there, great job, Pass Kyle, we are on to Prosper Tomebound. Prosper is one of those commanders where you can give it the deck to a new player, and by the commander just existing causes the game to sometimes just spiral into insanity as the value gets too high for you to overcome. Josh Lee Kwai would be proud. But in our case, Prosper, for me, it was actually a build that I did for my friend, and I ended up sort of gifting him the deck list. I was like, here, I bestow upon you the holy relic that is this Rakdos commander that's way too powerful to be used in casual pods. And his deck went from sort of not so good to lethal. Like, this deck can be insane for not a lot of money, and you should check out my video on Prosper if you have not yet already. But I'm going to put him in B because I don't mind playing against it. It's not so overpowered it breaks everything, and it's just a great, really great, consistent commander if you want that type of experience. All right, we talked about Ariette already, but let's talk about Narsi Fablesinger. It's the Abzan commander, human bard, 3/3 for 4 mana with lifelink, pretty good. Whenever you sack an enchantment, draw a card, and whenever the final chapter or ability of a saga you control resolves, each opponent loses X and you gain X, where X is that saga's mana value. Man, was I excited when this came out. And then there was a little card that got released very shortly thereafter called Tom Bombadil that basically just fully threw this card under the dumpster, and Narsi has not been heard from since. Now, this is one of those deck builds that I'm not crazy proud of. In hindsight, there's some things I could have done in order to make my deck list better. It was actually a video that I made for the channel, which you can go check out after this one. But in this case, I don't really have a lot of fond memories playing the deck. It's not that powerful. It kind of dirtles a lot. It's a bit slow. And that's unfortunately the play style because it's a saga commander that needs these sagas to reach the final stage in order to complete. For my purposes, it's not an E commander, but I think it's a D commander, sadly. So I did another budget challenge a long time ago, one that you guys have never seen. If you go to my Arcadeck, you can actually see some of the original $75 budget decks I did. I basically made a set of decks that I handed out to my friends during the Christmas time of year, and one of them was Narset Enlightened Exile. So I am a salty against regular Narset type of guy because it's way too strong for the average casual pod, and this one seemed like sort of a good compromise in very interesting ways. So it's Jeskai colors, it's a 3/4 monk for 4, and then other creatures you control have prowess. Well, that includes Narset herself as well. And then whenever it attacks, exile target non-creature, non-land card with mana value less than Narset's power from a graveyard and copy it. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. This card's really good for various reasons. You can build it in more of a token-heavy build with things like Monastery Mentor, Talran the Sky Summoner, etc. And then you can profit off of her ability second hand, or you can take it in more of an approach where you're forcing your opponents to put things into their graveyard. Maybe you storm off in a turn so her power is really high, and then you steal something, probably not so much from their graveyard, but definitely from your graveyard to copy it. And quite honestly, most of the time, you're going to hit something like an extra turn spell or something else that's crazy, and the game will end. This commander was really powerful for $75. I can only imagine what it will do for a higher budget. For my purposes, it's going to go into C because I don't have a ton of experience with it. Just when I made the deck and I saw someone else pilot it, and it was strong. But it's not really the play experience that I'm looking for, so it's going to go into C. Hey, see that? It's finally off the board. There she is. She's going to hide behind my rippling bicep over here. Actually, I feel like I've always been more of like a tricep guy personally, but you know. Anyways, we're talking now about Noyan Dar Royal Shaper. It's 5 mana Azorius commander. It's a 4/4 Merfolk ally, weirdly. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you may put 3 1/1 counters on target land that you control. If you do, it becomes a 0/0 elemental with haste that is still a land. Importantly, this is not until end of turn. So I made a Noyan Dar video a while back, and all the Noyan Dar enjoyers came out of the woodwork. I didn't realize that there was definitely sort of this existing group of people that have played this commander, either as a commander or in like a format like Standard when it used to be popular. It was actually surprisingly good, but it's one of those commanders that's really hit or miss. I think for the novelty alone of being an Azorius Lands Matter commander, I have to put it in B, but in no way could I put it in A because of the consistency issues. If you're okay with a play experience that's not 100% consistent, but you want something off meta, I think it's a great option. So give Noyan Dar a look. A deck that I still have put together, it is dual color Omnath. It is Gruul Omnath Locus of Rage. 7 mana. Sounds like a lot, but stick with me. It has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you make a 5/5 red and green elemental. And then on top of that, whenever this card or another elemental you control dies, it deals 3 damage to a creature or player. So this is one of those classic situations. I still have this deck. My fiance is the one that primarily plays it. This deck is like just good because you have so much ramp in this deck, which is the purpose. It's landfall, right? That a lot of the time you are able to cast and recast your commander, even in the event that it gets removed, even for 11 plus mana. And even when the commander comes out at a later stage like that, you still have access to the tools to do a ton of landfall shenanigans. And then from there, very simple to get over the finish line. You just overwhelm people with 5/5s, and if there's a board wipe to get rid of all of them, well, unless it's farewell, typically Omnath says, ah yes, all of those elementals died. Whoever cast the board wipe, you are now boom dead. So this card is great. Honestly, it's great for new players too, because it's very straightforward. Not a lot of thinking involved. And I think it's just a good generic commander. I think it's actually going to go in B because I've kept it around for a reason. It's simple, it's straightforward, it's effective, it's Gruul Landfall. Somebody coined that. Put it on a shirt for me. I tried to pull out the other card, but it must be buried somewhere. We're talking about Mowu, Loyal Companion. So I did this as a budget popper deck, actually, a popper commander. It's a 3/4 Hound, by the way, 3/3, with Trample and Vigilance. And if one or more 1/1 counters will be put on Mowu, that many +1 are put on it instead. Actually a really fun deck, and I would encourage you to play it in Pauper just because this particular commander does quite well. It's quite resilient, and there's a lot of green protection spells that you can use that also incidentally put counters on your commander. So you can buff it instant speed, put a bunch of counters on it, kill people with commander damage, and or you can do things like protect it at instant speed and then get synergy with it by just putting 1/1 counters on it. It's pretty cool. So I would give Mowu Loyal Companion a look. It's going to fall in the C tier for me because it's definitely not crazy strong, but it's quite good. Do not sleep on the dog. It is quite good. All right, we're finally starting to overlap a little bit, so sorry if it cuts off, but I have no other option. We're talking about Muldrotha now. It is 3 in a Sultai. You know her. You love her. I'm pretty sure it's a her. I will use that from now on for the rest of this video so I don't get canceled. Elemental Avatar 6/6. During each of your turns, you may play up to 1 permanent card of each permanent type from a graveyard. And if a card has multiple permanent types, you get to choose which one to play. This is just like generic good stuff. Like Wizards knew what they were doing when they printed Muldrotha. She's very effective at what she does. Great graveyard synergy deck. If you're looking for an entry deck graveyard for somebody, a graveyard commander to run for somebody, honestly, Muldrotha could be it. I mean, it's landfall synergy because we have like the green, the blue. Simic colors are always good for landfall. So you have some self-mill built in. There's a lot of new cards that have come out recently that help mill you, plus have land synergy like an Aftermath Analyst. I feel like I've mentioned it too many times. And on top of that, you just get additional value for just playing your commander. It's great. Muldrotha, it's great. That's my slogan for this one. And it's going to go into C. I don't think it makes it into B. It's generically powerful, but it doesn't get me excited. It doesn't wake me up in the morning. So Boros equipment is actually a theme that I have tried time and time again to make work to mixed success. And I think the closest I've got so far is Nahiri Forged in Fury. It's a 6-mana Boros commander, but it has affinity for equipment. It costs 1 less for each equipment you control. So typically it's just 2. It's Boros colors. That's it. And what do you get for that? You get a 5/4 with whenever an equipped creature you control attacks, exile the top of your library. You may play that this turn. You may cast equipment spells this way without paying their mana cost, which makes it extra good. So this plus a Pure Steel Paladin, you are in heaven. Equipping for 0, swinging out, and it rewards you also for putting equipment on multiple different creatures, not just Nahiri. So you try to avoid the situation where it's only a Voltron style build. Unfortunately, as with all equipment commanders, it tends to lean that way anyway. But, excuse me, I've also seen this built living weapon style. And quite honestly, the living weapon style is the one that excites me the most. I played that deck. I liked it. It's not super powerful, but I think that if you're looking for a unique equipment deck that is in the living weapon theme, that's not like Temet, Vizier of Noctamen or whatever his name is, I think Nahiri Forged in Fury might get you your fix. And for that reason, she's going to go in B. Also, I feel like nobody can really see it, but it's like up there, right there. I actually have a Nahiri poster because Nahiri, I love Nahiri, just like backstory-wise, also like appearance, like just cool as fuck, you know? Now up next is Chulane, Teller of Tales. Look, do I even need to say anything more? It's Chulane, it's powerful. I built him Merfolk, and I'll be honest, the Merfolk build is just as busted as any other Merlane deck. Any other Chulane deck. So Chulane is a human druid, 5 mana in Bant colors with vigilance, 2/4. Whenever you cast a creature, draw, crazy, then you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield because it needed to be better. They said, Beast Whisperer, hold my beer, just go ahead and, be every single Bant creature commander, more or less. And you can also, because it's not enough, pay 3 and tap, return target creature you control to its owner's hand. Did I hear infinite combos? I heard infinite combos. This card is disgusting. Listen, in good conscience, I cannot put it in A, B, or C because I do not want you guys playing more Chulane out there. Be more creative. Do better. It's going to go all the way in E because that's my list. Even though it's not correct, it's my list. Speaking of generically powerful for no good reasons, Wizards of the Coast this time presents Miram, Sentinel Worm. It was another $75 budget deck I did, and my God, is it powerful. So this is a 6/6 flyer for 3 in Teamer. For war, and oh God, it has Ward. Oh God, it's terrible. Oh, Gavin Verhey, call me so we can talk about this Ward issue. Whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control, not even cast, just ETB. Oh my God. Create a token that's a copy of it, except it isn't legendary. Oh my God. This is going to be, I think this almost has to be a Merlane. God, it's late in the day, guys. I'm sorry. It has to be a Chulane situation. I almost feel like out of principle, Miram winds up in E. E for exceptionally overpowered. I think that's what I have to do. It's too good. This commander is disgusting. If you want a dragon commander, here's your guy. You can just play regular ass dragons and you're still going to have a good time. You can build this for $25 to $50 like I did and steamroll the table. This is an example of a generically very, very powerful commander. And even if you build it budget, it will turn heads and knock skulls. So be careful if you bring it to any pod that is even loosely unfamiliar with what this guy can do. Yeah, that's right. I put him in E tier. What are you guys going to do about it? Yep, that's what I thought. We're moving on to Mishra, Eminent One. Now, this is a commander I have not yet released a video for. I am frustrated. I'll be honest. So Mishra Eminent One is 2 in Grixis for a 5/4 Human Artificer. That at the beginning of combat, you make a token that's a copy of target non-creature artifact you control, except its name is Mishra's War Form. And it's a 4/4 construct artifact token in addition to its other types. It gains haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. I don't know if I said creature, but it's a creature. It's a 4/4 creature. This card, I want it to be able to end the game like I think in my mind it should, but it never does. Oh God. I'm so pained by this card because I have an active list I have been working on for no kidding 4 months. This is why my videos take so long, guys. Him right here. And unfortunately, it's just generically good. And there's a lot of crazy combos that can go into this, like Gonti's Aetherheart, for instance. But it comes at the cost of running expensively costed artifacts, and if your board gets disrupted in any big way, it's difficult for you to rebuild. You're 1 Vandal Blast away from having your entire evening ruined, essentially. And for that reason, I'm going to put it in C, and you may or may not ever get a video for this commander because I'm having a hard time finding a happy medium for him, quite honestly. I have a story to tell you guys. It's about this one right here, Moira and Teshar. Man, buckle in for this one. So 5 mana. It is an Orzhov commander, Phyrexian Spirit Bird, 4/5 flyer. And whenever you cast a historic spell, let's remind ourselves, what's a historic spell, Kyle? I'm glad you asked. It's an artifact, legendary, or saga. Return target. So whenever you cast one of those, return target non-land permanent from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of the next end step. If it would leave the battlefield, exile it instead of putting it anywhere else. Let's take a minute to just let that sink in, because this is one of those situations where you are going to be tempted. The devil is going to be on your shoulder, but luckily I am your angel on the opposite, telling you to not run as many blink effects. You do not need blink effects in this deck. You can run a few, but you don't need a lot. And that's because we fell into this trap where my fiance really wanted to play this commander because she liked the artwork, as do I. That's why I wanted to build it. She liked the typing. She liked the story behind it. We liked the effect because it has a powerful effect. But I ran too much blink in my deck. Do not run excessive blink. It is going to chunk up your deck. It's going to gum it up. You're not going to be able to have a good play experience. Just go ahead and look at my Moira and Teshar list on my Architect and just give it a dry run. See how you feel with that list. I promise you it's going to do degenerate, disgusting things, and you're going to love it. Everyone's going to love it. So I'm going to put Moira and Teshar at A, actually. Bet you didn't see that coming. To be fair, it's probably an A because I also have like a link with my fiance regarding the commander. But you know, to each their own. Let's talk about Ishin Two Heavens as one. So this is a commander that I literally just put out a video on. I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about it. You already know what it does. It's Mardu, it's a 3/4 samurai, and it doubles your attack triggers. That's all you need to know. It doubles your attack triggers. It does crazy stuff, and you can build a really, really powerful Ishin deck for $50. For that, I love it, and for that, it's going to get B tier. Listen, I'm about to hit you all with a hot take. Kaza Royal Chaser, 2 mana. It is an Izzet commander, 1/2 human wizard with flying and haste. Tap. The next instant or sorcery you cast this turn costs X less, where X is the number of wizards you control as this ability resolves. This is a prime example of trying to make a deck work when it simply does not work. So Wizard Tribal was a thought, and it's just that. It was just a thought. It actually did not work very well because you're splitting, just like the Moira and Teshar discussion. Your focus of the deck is split so much between running wizards that are powerful enough to coincide with usage of your instants and sorceries, but you still need a good amount of instant and sorcery spellslinger support in order to make the deck work. And that was a hard balance to meet. I failed time and time and time again with this deck, and I can't really recommend it. I think that if you're willing to run a janky Izzet build, maybe give it a look. But I don't even think I have a deck list available for it because I failed so many times. I felt like it wasn't worth the hassle. On to the next one. This coincides with Mowu. This was my popper commander for myself. It's Jasmine Boreal of the 7. Now, if you know, you know. 3 mana, Selesnya. 2/4, Human Druid. Tap to add Selesnya. Spend this only to cast creatures with no abilities. Creatures you control with no abilities can't be blocked by creatures with abilities. How beautiful is that? I challenge you to find anything other than a token. That's it. Just stop at tokens. If you look at every other creature that we run in the format currently, 0 are actually creatures with no abilities. This gets through all the stinking time. It's 3 mana with ramp in your command zone playing, yes, the, what is it called again? Creatures with no abilities tribal. Again, it's that time of night, guys. Jasmine has been great. I really enjoyed her in Pauper, and I decided to build this with Pauper because I wanted to maybe transition this to a more competitive build, you know, like in my regular groups, but you run it a few times and you sort of get the experience, and then that's about it. It's cool, it's fun, it's quirky. People don't expect it, especially if you break it out randomly. I think for that reason, it's going to get a B tier rating, but it could never be, in my opinion, an A tier commander for me personally. Hey guys, I'm about to let you in on a little secret. If you play Toxrill, you should also be in the F tier. No, I'm just kidding. If you want to play Toxrill, go for it. But when I played it in my groups, everybody hated me with a capital HATED. And then typically there were other choice words following that. F tier. I really want to talk about this guy quite badly. It is Kylox, Visionary Inventor. And you know what? It probably went under the radar for you guys because it was released kind of subtly with the Murders of Karlov Manor set. It's a 7 mana 4/4 Vyashino Artificer. I don't know if that's pronounced correctly. I'm sorry. It's Menace, Ward 2. Why doesn't it have Ward really at this point? Haste, and whenever it attacks, sacrifice any number of other creatures, then exile the top X of your library, where X is their total power. But wait, it gets better. You may cast any number of instants and or sorceries from among the exiled cards without paying their mana cost. I have for a long time wanted to make Izzet Spellslinger work with effects like Talrand the Sky Summer, Alondra the Sky Dreamer, etc. Haven't had any success until I found this guy. And with this deck, Kylox is disgusting. I win off of these crazy exile the top 40 of my library, hit my extra turn spells, and then I can rebuff my board on the next turn, swing out and kill everybody. Ton of fun. I love this guy. Like I said, you already know I have a type, and it's Izzet. He's going to go up an A. One that you've probably forgotten about, that is Kadena, Slinking Sorcerer. For 1 in Sultai, you get a Naga Wizard for 3/3, and the first face-down creature that you cast each turn costs 3 less. So most of the time, the first one is 0 mana. And then whenever a face-down creature enters the battlefield, you draw a card. Man, this commander is sneaky good. Honestly, I would still have it together if it wasn't such a pain in the butt to play. You really need to be a more experienced player in order to properly pilot this deck. But even though I wasn't an experienced player, it is one of those decks that is sneaky good. You're going to win games out of nowhere. People are inherently not going to attack you because they have no idea what could be face down. So Kadena is great. I'd highly recommend you maybe go back and look at her and give her a try. I'm going to put her in B tier, but she's kind of like Orvar. She could almost ride the line between A and B because she's very surprising with how effective she is. She's just annoying to keep up with management of all the little things that happen, but it's a unique ability still that I think has some legs, especially with the recent Murders of Karlov Manor release stuff with the, whatever it's called, disguise mechanic or whatever it is. So give Kadena a look. My dogs are barking. That means someone's here to take me away to the mental purgatory where I'm going to spend the rest of my days because I'm recommending Lannis Cryptozoologist to you. It is a 2 mana Simic Snake Elf Scout when it's 1/2 stat lined. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you investigate. And what does investigate do, class? That's right. You said it first, not me. You make a clue. But it gets better because you can tapify. You can tap and then sacrifice X amount of clues, and then target opponent reveals the top X of their library. You can then put a non-land permanent with mana value X or less from among them onto the battlefield. That player puts the rest on the bottom in a random order. So why did I build this commander? I built it because I wanted to experience the clue theme in the most broken way possible. And I think Lannis gets there. 2 mana to get out early, and then you play a bunch of elves on top of that, like Llanowar elves, etc. Ramps you, gets you your clues. The clues at a later stage in the game, if you haven't hit your combo yet, also kind of get you over the hump, which is nice. And then the combo typically goes something like make infinite mana, play Shrieking Drake an infinite number of times, activate Lannis, untap Lannis, steal everyone's best cards out of their deck. It's fun, and nobody sees it coming. I'm tempted to put this higher, but I think it has to be a B tier commander because for me at least, it's just creature combo. It's fun, it's different, but at the end of the day, it's still creature combo. But Lannis is fun, I'd give him a look. So you've already heard me talk about Karametra. I'm not going to beat you dead over the head with how much I've actually loved this commander. It's one of my first ever commanders. It was like one of my first ever commander decks. It's Selesnya, 5 mana, 6/7 god with indestructible, and it's not a creature unless your devotion is 7 or more. And then whenever you cast a creature, you may search your library for a forest or plains card, put it onto the battlefield, tapped, and shuffle. That's so crazy. You just cast a Llanowar Elves, and you're like, yep, I just get free ramp off of that. And most of the time, my commander is going to be protected because it's not actually a creature yet, so it can't be targeted with Swords to Plowshares, and it's still an enchantment, so it's just good. If you want to go back and watch my Karametra video, I'd encourage you to give it a look. Out of respect to her name, it's going to go right up there in A. We're on to the octopus. And no, I don't mean insert hentai website here. It is Marvo Deep Operative for 3 in Dimir for a 1/8 octopus rogue. Whenever it attacks, you clash with defending player. And then also whenever you win a clash draw, then you may cast a spell from your hand with mana value 8 or less without paying its mana cost. I literally just had somebody minutes ago comment on one of my videos about the Marvo deck, and they said, bro, this deck is freaking awesome. Love it. I'm going to just put a few extra turn spells in, but otherwise, exactly what I wanted. Go give my Marvo deck a list, or go give my Marvo list a look, and then give it a try, because I think you'll be impressed with what this deck can do. For Clash, for those of you who don't remember, each clashing player reveals the top of their library, then puts that card on the top or bottom. A player wins if that card had a higher mana value. So if you win the clash, you just say, okay, great, I'll put it into my hand, and then I'll cast whatever big dumb thing that it was. I did not put extra turn spells in my version because it felt a little bit too overpowered for the group that I'm in, but Marvo is great. I'm really satisfied with the way the deck panned out. That is an A tier for sure. I'd like to convince myself I'm coming down the home stretch, but really I'm just in the grip of insanity as I start to talk about Umbra Sphere Manifest. It's 5 mana. Oh god, it's Dimir. It's a 1/1. Gets bigger, I swear, every guy ever, right? Nightmare Horror. And whenever Umbrous Manifest gets +1/+1 for each card your opponents own in exile. Pretty sweet. Whenever it or another Nightmare/Horror ETBs under your control, target opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile a land. Wow, this deck has been through a lot of iterations. I would encourage you to go back and watch my video regarding my response to Joey, the one that put out the Umbrous list initially, inspired me to build it. And then I rebuilt it more around the tribal synergy theme, and I'm much happier with it in the current tribal build. My fiance still plays this deck. Umbrous still gets to some insane heights like 60-60 or 90-90, and then can swing in and kill people with commander damage, unblockable. It's a lot of fun, and I would honestly think a list like this could be good for new players too, because it's straightforward enough. It's just like play a horror, go, exile things until this happens, and then I just get bigger. Just tell me how many you exiled. It's pretty straightforward. So I love Umbrous. I would give it a try, and I would also watch my video that I did on Umbrous as well. Let's talk about Unesh Cryo Sphinx Sovereign. I did a video on this commander as well. It's a 6 mana Sphinx tribal commander. It's a 4/4 with flying. Here's the kicker. Sphinxes cost 2 less. Wow. And whenever this or another Sphinx ETBs under your control, you basically factor fiction. Reveal the top 4, and an opponent separates them in 2 piles. 1 goes into your hand, 1 goes into your graveyard. This card's broken. It's disgusting. I built a deck for like $90 and it feels like a $400 deck because it just does degenerate, disgusting things game after game after game. If you want a consistent mono blue tribal commander, look no further than Unesh. I'd highly recommend you give it a try, but use some caution when you play it because it's so strong that people will not see it coming, and honestly, people will probably get salty. But forewarn them, they can't be salty, right? We all know it's not going to happen anyway. But I think for that reason, I'm going to put Unesh. Oh, I'm so torn. Oh, yeah. Oh, God, the mic. Oh, flashbang. I'm going to put Unesh in A. I've decided. That's my final decision. So this is yet another deck that I built for one of my friends. It's Azuri Claw of Progress. This was more of a personal one for me because my friend that got me into the game, this was one of his original decks. And Azuri Claw of Progress, I have a lot of fond memories about because I would play Niv Mizzet Perun against him in 1v1s. And I feel terrible because what's in Azuri? A bunch of low-costed things, a bunch of little things, right? And then in response to those little things coming into the battlefield, guess what? I can blow them up with Niv Mizzet. But I don't think I would have fell in love with the game if he had not given me that opportunity to experience those type of degenerate pub stomping, I would call it, type of games. And Azuri, for that reason, holds a little spot in my heart. It's a 4-mana Simic commander. It's a Phyrexian Elf Warrior for 3/3. And then whenever a creature with power 2 or less ETBs under your control, you get an experience. That is you, by the way, not just the Azuri itself. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you put X 1/1 counters on another target creature, where X is the number of experience counters that you have. This card's actually quite good. And the upgrades to the deck that I made for my friend are things like Sage of Hours, which goes infinite with Azuri. Basically, you put counters on it, you remove said counters from it, you take an extra turn, rinse and repeat until everybody dies. And other than that, there's also like just a ton of really great little cards that you can play from times past, like any of the 1-mana elves or Thrumming Bird, etc. Cold Eye Selkie, the list goes on. It's just a good commander, generally. And if you're looking for sort of an intro commander, I think it works out great, quite plainly. I'm going to put him in B because it's not the strongest. It's also not my deck. I made it for somebody else, and I've watched them pilot it time and time again. It's great. So I'd give Azuri a look for sure. I just learned how to pronounce this the other day, and I feel like a 5-year-old after they learned how to pronounce the word thesaurus. It is Velomachus, Lorehold. It is a 7-mana Boros Elder Dragon for 5/5 from Strixhaven. Flying Vigilance Haste. Tell me more. Tell me much more. Whenever Velomachus attacks, look at the top 7 of your library and you can cast an instant or sorcery with mana value less than or equal to its power from among them without paying its mana cost. Put the rest in the bottom in a random order. Typical build is Velomachus with every single extra combat build or extra combat spell in the game in this deck. So all of the World at War effects, etc. I decided to not build my Velomachus deck that way. I put 0 extra combats in, and quite frankly, it does not work. This is one of those commanders where, unfortunately, if you are to play it, I would say it's in the 99 of another deck, or you just build it with the extra combats because it's 7 mana in Boros in order to get this freaking thing on the battlefield. Then you have to actually swing and hope it lives. Hopefully it does, right? It doesn't have ward. This is before the great ward crisis of 2022. And Velomachus after that still has to have, you'll have to mark the damage on it, etc. if there's blockers, whatever. But, you need to just get extra combat after extra combat. You chain it, somebody dies, and then you hopefully mutilate somebody else's board to then close out the game on your next turn, etc. Just not that fun of a commander, honestly. I'm going to be taking the deck apart. For me, it winds up in the D slot, I think. Hey, look, it's the deck that I give all of my new players. It's Vrestin, Menoptera Leader. This is literally just Selesnya 1/1 counters, but it's on a cool sort of like alien bug that people always find interesting. And I have the fancy foil version of it because it was like, I don't know, $1. I don't remember, but everybody looks at it and go, ooh, it's so pretty. And by the way, the deck is really powerful because it's Selesnya 1/1 counters. Vrestin is X green, white for a 0/0 with flying, and then it enters the battlefield with X 1/1 counters on it, so whatever you pump into X. And then when it enters the battlefield, you also create X 1/1 green and white alien insect tokens with flying, and then whenever you attack with 1 or more insects, you put a 1/1 counter on each of them. Yes, Vrestin is great. I love this card because it's the prime example of a deck that works without your commander. I know I just did the video on this, but Vrestin is really seriously one of those cards where you do not need to cast her a single time in order for the deck to work. And then you cast Vrestin and the game collapses in on itself because you make, 10, 15 insects, maybe more. And then if you get to your turn, you're just like threatening lethal on everybody. It's great. So I would really encourage you to play Reston. I would encourage you to give it to a new player in your group so they can feel the power of Selesnya 1/1 counters in a big way. And it's also cool. So give Reston a try. That was A, by the way. Vrondis, on the other hand, I don't think he's going to make it into A, but I haven't decided yet. It's Rage of the Ancients. It's 5 mana and Gruul for a 5/4 Dragon Barbarian. And here's the cool part. It has Enrage. Whenever it is dealt damage, you may create a 5/4 red and green dragon spirit token with when this creature deals damage, sacrifice it. Not when it takes, when it deals. And cool thing here also, whenever you roll 1 or more dice, you may have Vrondis deal 1 damage to itself. So the way that I built this was actually combo, and you can actually access the full deck list through my Patreon if you wanted to sign up on my Patreon. It's one of my original posts that I did because I felt like it wasn't enough to justify a full video, especially years after the release of this card. But I didn't want a standard just dice rolling deck because, quite frankly, all of the dice rolling stuff is done better with as many colors as reasonably possible, because when you're trapped into just Gruul, there's not quite enough to make the dice rolling mechanic really worthwhile. Therefore, I went with Enrage Infinite Combo, essentially. And I'm just like not fully, I like the way that the deck functions. It works well. It combos off routinely. It's in Gruul colors, so you're going to get there a lot of the time. But, for me personally, I'm looking for a bit more. And I think for that reason, I'm going to actually put Vrondis in B. It's good, but it needs a little bit more support with like dice mechanics and stuff like that for me to really feel strongly about it. Up next is another commander that I'm actively trying to crack, and that's Waita, Trainer Prodigy. It was the secondary commander in the Velociraptor precon, I want to say, that recently came out. It's in Naya. It's only 3 mana in Naya. Human Warrior, 1/5 with haste. You can pay 2 and a green, tap. Target creature fights another creature. It costs 2 less if it targets 2 creatures that you control. Fancy that. So what this means is it's just 1 green, they fight. It's an enraged deck. It's a fight deck. If a creature you control being dealt damage causes a triggered ability of a permanent to trigger, that triggers an additional time. So it's a Panharmonicon on a stick with fight mechanic and ability to essentially generate extra value and remove people's things in the process. It's a strong deck, I'm not going to lie. But for my purposes, when I'm looking at a deck like this, you have to factor in sort of the resiliency of the deck. Like, how quickly can it rebuild if it gets wiped? Because unfortunately there's going to be collateral damage with things fighting each other. How frequently can you get to the infinite combos in the deck? Is it even possible to get to infinite combos in the deck? And unfortunately, Waita doesn't trigger or check all of those boxes. So for me, she's actually going to end up in the B tier. But I would be on the lookout because I might end up doing a video in the near future about Waita once I fully get the deck list pinned down. But with MH3 and everything else, I have way too much going on to do that right now, but I'll be looking forward to doing it in the future. And for now, she's going to be in the B tier. Another commander that I actually produced on a live stream for somebody. It's Shelob, Child of Ungoliant. It's 6 mana, so it's 4 and then Golgari for a Spider Demon for an 8/8 Death Touch. Here it is, Ward 2. Oh my god, it gets worse. Other spiders you control have Death Touch and Ward 2. Whenever another creature is dealt damage this turn by a spider you control and it dies, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a food. And it's, pay 2, sack it, gain 3 life, and it loses all other card types. Fun commander. So the way that I built it for somebody else was Spider Tribal, and they have told me that the deck is quite good now. There was some inconsistencies that needed to be ironed out, but at least the deck version that I did seemed like it was fun for that person. I'm putting this out there because I didn't actually pilot this deck. I just built it for somebody else on stream. And I think that it's worth a look if you're interested in a Spider Tribal commander, because there's maybe one other Spider Tribal that you could build, but I think that this one in particular has a lot of utility and its abilities allow you to do some pretty degenerate things. So I would give Shelob a look, but for me, it's going to go in the C tier. Let's talk about the Gurk, the slow Gurk Overslime. It's 3 mana in Simic, 1 blue-green for a trampling ooze, 3/3. Whenever a land is put into your graveyard from anywhere, put a 1/1 counter on this. Remove 3 1/1 counters from it and return it to your hand. And whenever it leaves the battlefield, return 3 lands from your graveyard to your hand. So I built this because there was a Commander at Home episode where somebody piloted Slow Gurk, and I thought it was cool. but I thought I could do it on a budget. So I built it on a budget, and quite honestly, it didn't function as intended. I think I won 1 game out of like 10 that I played with the deck. It's okay. It's not that great though. I don't think I'm going to build Slogurk again. There's so many better landfall commanders out there. I think this is a great addition in the 99 of a deck, but not so much, I think, in terms of helming the entire ship, being the commander. For that reason, I'm going to actually put it in D. D for deal with it. Am I right, guys? Sir Conrad. What more is there to say? F tier. Okay, maybe not just F tier. The problem with this commander is that it's hard to build a Sir Conrad deck in a casual, fun way where you're going to enjoy the night with your friends. It's always like, I'm just going to murder all of you in one turn with like flipping my deck in graveyard, and everybody's going to lose 30 or 40 or whatever it is. I never had a good time playing this deck. It's too linear. It's so dependent on the commander most of the time. It's asking to just be removed immediately because people can't let it live. Otherwise they die. I'm going to put it in F tier. I'm sorry, guys. And up next is the Master Multiplied. It's 6 mana Rakdos for a Time Lord Rogue with Myriad. And the Legend rule does not apply to creatures that you control, and triggered abilities you control cannot cause you to sacrifice or exile creature tokens you control. Essentially, you just generate infinite value off of the Master Multiplied. I did a video on him. I would encourage you to go check it out. I feel like it's one of the better videos on YouTube regarding this commander. I do not at all vibe with this play style. I played the deck, I piloted it, I tested it, but it's not for me. I really feel like you need to be somebody who's more of an inherently combo type player who enjoys the Rakdos colors. You need to be both of those things in order to enjoy this commander. So for that reason, I'm going to throw him in the D tier. Speaking of dealing with it, we have the Necrobloom. I already put out a video on this, so if you've watched it, thanks for watching. And thanks for watching like 3 hours into this. And this is a 1 in Abzan commander. It's a plant, 2/7, and it has landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you make a 0/1 green plant. If you have 7 or more, you make a 2/2 zombie instead. So it's basically a Field of the Dead. But even better, lands in your graveyard have Dredge 2, meaning if you would ever draw a card, instead you can mill 2 and then put a land that you select from the graveyard into your hand. Broken. Disgusting. Dredge is a crazy mechanic. It was, scrutinized and took over formats for a reason, and there are still active Dredge lists and things like Canadian Highlander, which is one of the most powerful formats in the game, still dominating. Dredge is a strong mechanic. This commander is incredibly strong. I'd encourage you to go watch my video on it. It's going to land in the B tier because I don't want to play against it. No, it's because I just don't think it deserves a spot in the A tier. I'm not going to play it again because it's simply too powerful for what it does. But that's MH3 wrapped up in one little ball right there. It's too powerful for its own good. Let's talk about an old card. So I'm actually going to be doing a video on this as well. So little spoiler. It's the Scarab God. It's 5 mana, so it's 3 Dimir for a god. It's a 5/5. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses X and you scry X, where X is the number of zombies that you control. And then you can pay 2 in Dimir, exile a creature from your graveyard, or from a graveyard, Create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 4/4 zombie, and then it has the god effect, where if it dies at the next end step, return it to your hand. We already know what that does, right? This card is one that I initially bought. I remember going to the old Millennium Games location, if you know, you know, and I opened up one of their old flip cases and I said, oh my God, this commander is disgusting. It's so good. Bought it for like 20 bucks or whatever it was at the time. And I built a deck around it, and it was Zombie Tribal. And I immediately did not like it. And it's because I didn't really understand the synergistic elements that make certain Dimir zombie lists better. And for that reason, I suffered. Now that I am a much better deck builder, I have built a recent list. It's a budget list, and it is much, much improved from my old list, and I actually quite enjoy it. I think, in fact, it could be a list that even you could give to a new player, I would argue, and they would have a good time. So I think that the Scarab God, unfortunately, it's not going to earn an A spot, even though it's one of the original decks that I've built and started off my commander journey, but it will make it into the B tier because apparently that's where I put everything that I can't decide on. All right, let's talk about the 10th Doctor and Susan Foreman pair. So I know there's a lot of argumentation around the 10th Doctor. Who's the proper paired? Is it Clara Oswald? Who is it? I still think it's Susan Foreman because I love Teamer. So the 10th Doctor, this is the real bread and butter. Susan just taps for green. That's all she does, really. 3, and then Is It colors for a Time Lord Doctor. 3/5 with Allons-y. And whenever you attack, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land. Put 3 time counters on it. If it doesn't gain suspend, or if it doesn't have suspend, it gains it. Great. And then also 7, time travel 3 times. Activate as a sorcery, meaning you can remove 3 time counters. Cha-ching, you get to cast whatever spell that is. I've had mixed success with the deck. I had much worse success when I tested with Clara Oswald. I could only really recommend Susan because she allows you to get the commander out in a timely manner. And then hopefully it sticks around so that way you can then attack with our boy or any other creature for that matter to trigger the ability to do basically the cascade until you hit a non-land card. And then from there, it's a matter of just letting your big cards that are in exile tick down naturally if it gets removed, or pay 7 and then kind of force them out and then just blow up the game from there. Extra turn spells, you name it. But for my purposes, it's not that exciting. I don't know. I'm not the biggest Doctor Who fan. That could also be a component of it. But for me, it's actually going to go in the C tier. It's good, but it's not amazing. All right, so we're actually narrowing in on the finish line here. I think we have like 15 or 16 or 17 more cards. I don't know. Next up is the Dragon. Let me tell you why you shouldn't play this card. Yeah, there's no reason. If you're looking for the de facto dragon commander, this is basically it. Outside of Miram, if you want a low to the ground powerful commander, wherever I put Miram, that's where they should go. But the Dragon, I think, is just like generically powerful. It's a little bit overhyped, and I actually made 3 different deck lists for it, tested them, and I found out that I wasn't really a fan of that type of play style. So they were since deconstructed, and I never made a video on it for some reason. I probably should. But the Dragon, I think, in my perspective, is going to be at a lower tier. I'm going to put it in D. All right, we have a twofer again. It's back to back. We have Zask, Skittering Swarmlord, and then Grist, Hunger Tide. So let's talk about Zask first. It's 5 mana. It's an insect. It's a 5/5, just in Golgari colors. You can play lands and cast insects from your graveyard. Super cool ability. But whenever another insect dies, put it on the bottom of its owner's library, then mill 2. And then you can pay 1 and a hybrid Golgari. Target insect gets +1/+0 and gains Death Touch until end of turn. So I thought I was being smart. I opened this in a pack of the Jumpstart 2022. I saw that it looked cool. It looked powerful. I liked the artwork. The artwork looks kind of sick. And so I built a deck around it, and it sucked. That's it. It sucked. It was terrible. And then, you know, it's crazy. I changed that with Grist, the Hunger Tide, which is 3 mana, 1 in Golgari for a Planeswalker. As long as this isn't on the battlefield, it's a 1/1 insect in addition to its other types, meaning it can be your commander. And then you can +1 it to make a 1/1 green and black insect, and then mill a card from your library. If it's an insect that was milled, a loyalty counter goes on Grist, and then you repeat the process. That's so powerful, so good. You may sacrifice a creature for -2, and when you do, destroy target creature or planeswalker. So there's removal stapled onto your commander. You get token generation. There's self-mill. And -5 each, I never used it, but each opponent loses life equal to the number of creatures in your graveyard. So here's how I'm feeling about it. Grist is certainly one of my more preferred or favorite planeswalkers, maybe outside of like Tamiyo. And Zask just didn't do it for me. Zask in the command zone is not that good. In the 99 is awesome. I love Zask in the 99. Not a good commander. Honestly, I'm thinking about putting Zask all the way in E because it basically emptied my spirit. So E for empty my spirit. And then honestly, I think about putting Grist all the way up in A because Grist is sort of like a de facto insect tribal commander for me now. And when I find a really good tribal commander like that, I'm starting to stick more to it. Like it's a simple build path. If I want to just sort of turn my brain off, play some insects and not think a lot, it's what I'm going to play. So I think I'm going to put Grist actually in A and then Zask in E. So let's do that. Let's talk about Svella Ice Shaper. It is a 3 mana 1 and then Gruul colors, so red and green, for a Troll Warrior 2/4, and you can pay 3 and tap it to create a colorless snow token named Icy Manolith. It just taps to add 1 mana of any color. And then you could pay 8 mana, then tap to look at the top 4. You can cast a spell from among them without paying its mana cost, and the rest go in the bottom in a random order. So this commander, essentially, I built it 3 years ago, I think. It was one of my first ever commander decks, but it just was not good. My play experience with this commander was essentially allow me to play an elf on turn 1, Svella turn 2, Icy Manalith turn 3, sometimes Icy Manalith turn 4 and 5 to finally activate the ability or play a big card in my hand. And by that time, I feel like my opponents have already passed me massively, and I could probably build a much better version of the deck now. Don't get me wrong. I think that there's definitely some combos that I could take a look at to improve this deck list. And it's still a cool commander. It's an uncommon for, Pete's sake. It's 3 mana with decent stat line and upside and card selection at a later stage in the game. It's not bad, but I just don't see myself ever playing it again, sadly. I think it's going to end up in C tier because generally I think it's a good commander. I just was a failure at the time in deck building, and I don't want Svella to suffer unjustly for that. So she's going to end up in C for Chili. The de facto elf commander, the one who ruled them all, Lathril. If you know, you know. It's 2 in Golgari colors for an elf noble, 2/3 with menace, and whenever this deals damage to a player, you create that many 1/1 green elf warrior tokens, and then tap 10 elves you control. Each opponent is drained for 10. So Lathril is my fiance's commander exclusively. I played the deck one time, but it was her very first deck ever, which is sort of sweet. It holds a spot in my heart for those purposes. It's a good commander. It's consistent. It's in great color pairing in Golgari. It has direct damage. It has token generation. It can get around other things being in the way by just tapping and draining. And then there's various ways to untap and repeat drain. It's just good. Like, that basically sums up my thoughts on this commander. And I am tempted to put Lathril all the way up here, mostly for sentimental reasons, because it's my fiance's very first commander deck, and I think that's pretty sweet. But I think it'd also be fun to trigger her and put Lathril all the way in F tier. So I'm going to put Lathril in F tier, but not because she's bad, because F stands for Forever After. So I'll see you forever after, Ellie. Speaking of forever after, it's what I'm going to be once I'm done with this recording. It's a zombie. It's Wilhelt the Rock Cleaver. Zombie warrior, 4 mana with Dimir colors. Great color pairing. Whenever another zombie dies, if it didn't have Decayed, you make a 2/2 zombie with Decayed. For a reminder, Decayed zombies cannot block, and when it attacks, it's sacrificed at the end of combat. And then at the beginning of your end step, you may sack a zombie. If you do, draw a card. You can sacrifice a Decayed zombie, by the way. No rules against that. Much better, in my experience, than the Scarab God initially. And that's because this is just an engine that sits in your command zone. It also acts as an insurance policy in your command zone, because when things die, they just come back as Decayed zombies. Sure, they can't block, but you have access to sacrifice them to an outlet. You can sacrifice them to Wilhelt to draw cards. There's various cards in the deck that synergize with token generation, for instance. Wilhelt is another one of those commanders that's just generically good, and he makes his way sort of to the top of lists as a result. For my list, however, I don't really love him that much. For me, he's much more of a C tier commander than an A tier commander, but I could easily see somebody putting him up there as a result of the availability and ease of casting this guy. For me, though, he's in C. All right, Zimone and Dinah. This is another Sultai commander. It's only 3 mana. Human Dryad, 3/4. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, target opponent loses 2 and you gain 2. So drain ability. Tap and sack another creature. Draw a card. So there you go. Trigger it. You may put a land from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. If you control 8 or more lands, repeat this process once, meaning draw and then put another land into play. It's pretty good. Zimone and Dinah, I was going to make a full deck list or, deck tech for it. I was going to put out a video. This was a while back when I was sort of first into the YouTube game. I never did it, and that's because this deck just felt redundant, because landfall, unfortunately, can only go so far. You play enough of it, and you just get bored of it. Like, I have built probably 25 to 50 landfall decks. Quite honestly, they're not going to make it up here because I've forgotten about them. I have played so many different commanders in landfall. I feel like it's burned into my skull every card that goes into a landfall deck. And that's just this. It's generic. It's not exciting. It's just the generic landfall stuff that makes it into every landfall deck. For that purpose, I'm going to throw it in D. I'm not that excited about Zimone and Dinah. So I did a deck review video where I went over Jacob Bertrand's Coma Cosmos Serpent deck when he was on game nights for the Kaldheim release. I broke it down and I made some improvements, and then I test ran the deck afterwards, and I must say it's a pretty brutal deck to play against. It's 7 mana for a Serpent 6/6. It cannot be countered. And then at the beginning of each upkeep, you make a 3/3 blue Serpent that's named Coma's Coil, and you can sacrifice another Serpent to either tap down a permanent, and then its activated abilities cannot be activated this turn, or Coma gains indestructible. So essentially, you reach a point where the only way people can get rid of Coma is through exile, and there's a lot of ways to do that. Swords, Path, Farewell, but that's a lot of like white stuff, and then you're in blue, so you're probably holding up a counter spell, so you're just accruing value through your tokens every combat, and then also holding up protection on your opponent's turn so you can get back to yours to kill people. It's fine. I am not a huge fan of this card. I think that it's definitely a win more commander in a lot of ways because you need a lot to go right. It's heavily costed. And then typically your win condition is attrition. You get there through slowly squeezing the life out of the table. Not really my play style. It's still a good commander, though, if you're looking for just a generically good Simic commander. I mean, there's a lot of them, to be fair, but Coma could be one of them, and I would encourage you to go watch my video about Coma. So it's going to go in C. Shauna, Purifying Blade, Bant colors, Human Warrior 3/3 with lifelink, and at the beginning of your end step, you may pay X. If you do, you draw X, where X cannot be greater than the amount of life that you've gained this turn. Now, I have to admit something. This is more of a brawl deck. I built this as a 60-card deck and then briefly upgraded it to 100 cards to play with my friends. I built it at 60 because what my fiance and I did was we opened a box and then we just made decks out of whatever was in the box, which probably wasn't the greatest idea. I forget what set this came in. It looks like Dominaria United. And honestly, Shanna is great. Like, it only works because it enables itself in the Brawl format, but I played this with some modifications and life gain, some Soul Sister stuff, and generally I was impressed by it. But it's really a capped commander. It's not pushed. Let's put it that way. Because you're really gated by the amount of mana you have available to draw your cards in end step. Sometimes you take almost an entire turn off just to sort of refill your hand a bit, which feels bad in a 4-player format. Shauna's still good, though, and I would consider giving her a try if you're looking for an alternative sort of life gain build. So I think Shauna's at least worth a look, and for that reason, I'm going to put her at C. I feel like I'm genuinely going to lose my voice at the end of this, and it's all your fault. You made me do this. This is me in the present telling me that you made me do this. It's Neheb the Worthy. It's a 3-mana Rakdos Minotaur Warrior for 2/2 with first strike. Other Minotaurs you control have first strike. Seems good. As long as you have one or fewer cards in hand, Minotaurs also get +2/+0. And then whenever this card deals combat damage to a player, each player discards a card. So I built Minotaur Tribal. I'm sorry, guys. I'm coming clean. I did it. I built the Minotaur Tribal. It sucks. I did not enjoy it one bit. It's because the Minotaurs, unfortunately, don't really have a lot of good abilities. There's like maybe 10. That was what my count roughly that have genuinely good, consistent, cohesive abilities. And then you're running Draft Chaff, and that sucks. It is the opposite of Lathril, where Lathril, you don't even need her in the deck or you don't even need her to be in play in order to be doing things. It's almost like you really needed the commander or one of those other 10. Otherwise, you're playing Draft Chaff and you're having a terrible time. I did not like Neheb. I think maybe 7 years ago, this would have been a good commander, but I'm not impressed now. It's an E tier for me. I promised you'd be in here. It's Samut, Vizier of Noctumun. 3-mana, Gruul, Human Warrior Cleric for 2/3. Has first strike, vigilance, and haste. Amazing keywords. Great stat line. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, if that creature entered the battlefield this turn, you just get to draw a card. I mean, what more is there to say? Haste, Tribal, what is it? Terror, Leap Weapon, whatever his name is on here somewhere. Also goes in the deck. Also is good. And it's just a good deck. You can watch Brian Kibler play this deck. My version of my deck was quite similar to his on their game show, Commander at Home. So I'd encourage you to go give Brian Kibler a look, especially his Smoot list. It was what inspired me to build mine. It's just generically strong. It's not special in any particular way. And to be honest, the Gruul colors could be put to better use in another deck for me. So Samut got ripped apart, but it's generically good. And if you want a really powerful commander, here you go. I'm going to throw him in C tier. So I had a deck and it was called Crabby Dragons, and it was with this guy that just came out, Red Death Shipwrecker. It's an Izzet Crab Mutant for 1/3, or it has 1/3 stat lines, and you can tap and then goad target creature your opponent's control. That creature that player draws a card and you add red. Sorry. So basically tap, goad something, that player draws, and then you add red. So I had the idea, I thought it'd be funny to use this as sort of my enhancer, let's call it, for the deck, whereupon you play this out early, then you tap it to keep yourself out of harm's way, adding mana to accelerate your game plan, and then play big stinking dragons. Hence, here's a crab, there's your dragons, crabby dragons. And the deck just didn't work. I hate to say it. I think in a dedicated Go deck, this guy is just fine. It's a good commander, in fact. There's a lot of upside, and also people don't feel so bad because they're drawing cards, which they probably should be feeling bad because you're the one that's going to be reaping advantage from them. But in my case, it's more of a D-level commander. For you, though, I would encourage you to build it more of an actual Go deck because my Crabby Dragon idea just didn't really work. There's not enough synergy in here, and a lot of dragons don't really rely on goading outside of Vengeful Ancestor, I think is the name of it. So in that case, it's a D for me. I wish I could say it's C for Crab, but unfortunately we failed that. So I made a mistake a long time ago. I let my fiance play this deck. I bought the pre-con that it came in, which is On Hello the Painter. It's a Grixis Vampire Assassin 1/3 Death Toucher. The first instant or sorcery spell you cast each turn has Casualty 2, meaning that when you cast it, you can sacrifice a creature with power 2 or greater, and then copy the spell and choose new targets for the copy. This commander is actually busted. It's really strong. I just felt bad thinking back because my poor fiance had to pilot this deck with minimal experience in playing the game, and she suffered for it. I think that she's scarred from playing Spellslinger as a result of having her experience with this guy, but I promise you it's not as hard as it looks. You just need to get creatures on the board to sacrifice and then cast your big instants and sorceries. On Hello is great, and I think that there's room for me to experiment with him in the future. For that reason, I'm going to put him in C tier. He doesn't quite make B because I don't have a ton of personal play experience with the deck. I do, but it's a long time ago, so it's going to be a C tier for me. Sithis Harvest Hand. What more is there to say? F tier. No. Sithis is just too generically powerful. You know her. She's Selesnya. She's Enchantress. Whenever you cast an enchantment, gain a life, draw a card. It's a 1/2. You already know. I don't need to belabor you with it. I don't like this commander. It's boring to play against. It's boring to play. It's just like a quasi-stacks commander because you're just getting like ghostly prison effects on the board very fast. You're drawing your deck, and it's a slow, painfully just not release of a death whenever I play against this commander. E tier. This is the last commander, and the board's looking nice and full. I kind of like it. This is Genku Future Shaper. It just came out. I have a brand new deck. I don't know if I'm going to do deck tech yet or not on it. I have to decide. I really, really like this guy, though. So it's 4 mana, Azorius, Moonfolk Wizard, and it's a 2/5. Whenever another non-token permanent leaves the battlefield, that you control leaves the battlefield, choose one that has not yet been chosen, and then create a token with those characteristics. So you either make a 2/2 Fox with Vigilance, a 1/2 blue Moonfolk with Flying, or a 1/1 black Rat with Lifelink. And then you can pay 3 and also Azorius to put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. So it's Azorius Blink mostly with upside. So this commander's sneaky because you can also get value off of just playing your fetch lands, because when a fetch land leaves the battlefield, then that also triggers Genku. And of course, if you have token doublers or token triplers on the battlefield, that also leads to you doing some crazy things, making a bunch of extra tokens. And what's more on top of that, really, I think one of the reasons I genuinely love this card is the fact that, well, there's two. First off, he's married to Tamiyo, and I love Tamiyo. And then on top of that, the fox and rat, I believe, are adopted children because Genku is known to adopt kids. Like that's his thing. And then also the moonfolk is his child with Tamio. And I just love that the concept of this card is just Genku is a man who, I guess a man, maybe a moonfolk, I don't know, that knows sort of his role is to care for children. And there's something that just really sits well in my heart about that sentiment. So much so that I basically dropped everything when I heard that story. And I'm like, I'm making a freaking Genku deck because I just loved that sort of backstory. I'm like, not only is the backstory cool, but he's also married to Tamio. And I love Tamio. It's just like such a good combo. And it makes it even better that the deck is pretty damn good. So I think that with that in mind, I'm probably going to put him up at A tier. And for those of you who are thinking, man, this guy's crazy, he's talking about like adoption and kids and stuff. Yes. I recently read a book. It's called A Little Life. And there's a sequence in the book about adoption. And it's just like, it just rips you apart, man. Like if you aren't familiar with the adoption process or you want a good book that's going to like be down to earth, that's going to like rip you up inside, A Little Life really did that for me. And I found this commander pretty much right after I finished the book. And my God, I mean, it's just so heartwarming for this card, but heartbreaking for the other thing. I love it. It's going to go in A tier, and I'm really happy I got to end with this guy. So that's it. I can't believe that I finished. I did it in one day. Total recording time was 4 hours. Can you believe it? So this is the final list. I will not be putting it up on any online document or whatever because it's right there and you can go back and watch me rank everything. There you go. Solved. Case closed. So I obviously had more commander decks than this. I've probably built closer to like 150, but there's a lot of redundant commanders. I mentioned like the Simic Landfalls of the world and stuff like that. It's just not worthwhile going into all of the commanders because they're so redundant. They all do the same thing or very similar effects that I just felt like it'd be useless for you, the viewer. And I'd much rather actually give you my opinion on cards I feel somewhat strongly about or care about or, you know, are playing actively and testing actively. That way you actually have some tangible sort of stuff to go off of. You can actually feel like you left this video with something. That's sort of the goal, at least for me. And I do hope you did get something out of this. My voice is going to be absolutely shot and I have to record like 3 videos tomorrow. So wish me luck for that. If you got all the way in the video through this whole thing, I really want to give you a serious thank you for doing so. It really means a lot to me. Like when people get to the ends of videos like this, where it's multiple hours long and it's something that I put out to the world in a creative type of process that you have watched and hopefully either enjoyed, that's great, or you got something out of it, which is even better, then that makes me feel really good. So leave a comment down below and let me know about that. And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. And I would also encourage you to check out my Patreon, but subscribing is really the big one on this channel. If you want to really show your support, come back and watch more of my stuff. In fact, if you found this channel through this video, I would encourage you to go back and watch my other videos because I have full deck techs on like 30 or 40 of these cards. And I have lots of other cool videos out there too, some of which I'm really proud of how they turned out and they didn't really get a lot of views. So I'd encourage you to go back through my catalog and just sort of watch everything, as I've only been doing this for about a year now. So I have a lot that's sort of queued up. As always, don't ask me to wear something like this again. All right. If you do, I will come and find you and I will be wearing this Undertaker fashion as I rip you out of your bed in the middle of the night and force you to never ask me to wear this again. That was a little harsh, wasn't it? It doesn't matter. I've been recording for 4 hours. I think I can sort of say what I want. It's my channel. That wasn't a direct threat. For legal purposes, disregard everything that I just said. I really love you guys. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.